Hello and welcome to Taylor's Tales podcast. This is Chris's Corner. I am your host, Chris Taylor, and today we're back again with one of my greatest friends, Ollie Deacon. Hello, Ollie. How you doing, bud?
Hello, mate. Yeah, really good, thank you. Yourself?
Fantastic. I'm actually extraordinarily excited about this podcast, not only because I love Lord of the Rings, but also because we're moving on to maybe one of the greatest battle sequences of all time. Maybe we can get onto it within this podcast, but that'll be debated, I imagine.
Well, it's a long film, so yeah, who knows? But that fight scene, it was the longest fight scene in cinema history until that episode of Game of Thrones.
Oh, why did Game of Thrones have to ruin it? Oh, man. Oh, just... I'm not even going to give it the time of day. We're not speaking about it on this podcast. It's been revoked. It's out. Gone.
It was ruined.
It's ruined it, and it's made me not want to look at certain TV series about it. Let's focus on the positive here. Lord of the Rings, fantastic battle sequences. There's so much behind-the-scenes footage that I love talking about within Helm's Deep. We'll get onto that. First thing I would love to talk about, which I think we talked about in the previous podcast, was Gandalf versus the Balrog. We did talk about how there's a significant meaning behind the conveyor of information versus this shadow of Mordor. And I love the first sequence shot where it just pans in across the mountaintops and you hear this battle sequence go on, and sort of bringing in the viewer into the film. I think that out of all three films, I love it. Yeah, exactly. A reminder. It's probably out of the three films for me has the better beginning sequence because it really does it sort of nice seamlessly. I don't know if you sort of feel the same way, but
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Certainly like the beautiful shot as the camera pans over the mountains, and then we're inside Khazad Dûm. Seeing, and then obviously we're almost privy to part of the film, part of the story that the characters in the story aren't privy to, because we get to see Gandalf, fall into the abyss and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a very, 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 very well shot scene cinematically, and the music is good, and you see how badass Gandalf actually is. Even just physically, even without magic, you just see what he's actually like, what he's capable of. He is still, he's amazing. He's a warrior, definitely.
I loved it. I think that for me, and this, I'm not going to spoil the next part of the Return of the King, but it shows the potential that Gandalf had, why he was sent by the gods in the first place, the Valar in the first place, and why they told him he wasn't to use his power, because he was so, there's so much power there, so much self-contained power, that, can you imagine? He just says to sort of Aragorn in the previous film, he says, your swords are no good here. And then he goes on to use a sword to slay the Balrog single-handedly.
It's almost like if I was a more cynical man, I would just think, I'd be thinking that he just wanted all the glory.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
He was just fully aware that, no, this is my show.
Yeah. It was like, no, your sword ain't going to do anything, but mine will do the job.
I love that. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think
it's a fantastic moment, because it's like, I was thinking about this, and I only managed to kind of realise this when I was watching Return of the King, and as Frodo and Sam went into Mordor, we actually see, as far as I can tell, we see three characters have their own descent into their own Mordor, their own version of Mordor.
Yes.
If that makes sense?
It does.
Gandalf's is this one. Aragorn's, conversely, is when he goes into when he takes the Dimalt road to be the king of the dead. But obviously we can get to that in another podcast. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely brilliant, because Gandalf is supposed to be this amazingly powerful character, and psychologically speaking, he's like the god image that the Fellowship had. And he was faced with his polar opposite, the devil, basically, with wings, shadow and flame. I like the way Legolas describes it when he's telling Celeborn. What does he say? He says he was consumed by shadow. I think it's shadow and flame, or fire.
Yes.
Fire and shadow, something like that. Whatever it is, it's a good description of what it is, because it's like it's almost beyond real description.
Yeah.
You can't really describe it. Maybe Legolas could to the other beings, because maybe they've seen it, because obviously there were Balrogs at the fall of Gondolin, and so maybe somebody else had seen them. But for most people, it's like it's this thing you can't imagine it. It's that terrible. You could not imagine it. And Gandalf, obviously, he's lost his ideal with Saruman. It's supposed to be his ideal.
Yes.
And obviously, when you lose your ideal, you are in hell. Basically, there's nowhere else you can go. So you have to make your own. You have to forge your own ideal. I might use that word a lot.
No, it makes sense in this context more than anything else. I think that the ideal here, because this is self versus self. The Balrog is a Maya, and so is Gandalf. So you've clicked it straight away.
It's two opposite ends of the spectrum coming together to cancel each other out. And as far as we can tell, that's what happens in the Fellowship of the Ring, because they both plummet into the abyss. We later find out that Gandalf was actually able to overcome it, but it is like you have the. Jordan Peterson tells a story of a dream he once had, where he was in like a gladiator arena, and he had a fight with the devil, and God was watching, and he won, and God said, and he said like, what the hell to God, and God said, well, what did he say? It's like the hardest fight you could possibly fight, and still maybe win. And Gandalf actually won. And so then from that, he was able to then go to heaven, go beyond the stars. And then he came back in his mortal body, more powerful though, with upgrades, so to speak. And now he's Gandalf the White. And now he's the ideal that Saruman should have been.
Yes.
That's obviously what he actually uses those words. Saruman as he should have been.
Yeah. And it's perfect because what you've just talked about there, that Jordan Peterson going into a dream state and fighting basically the darker part of himself, the devil, is very similar to what Gandalf's done. But also, it's fantastic sort of cinematography again, because Peter Jackson gets Frodo to wake up from a dream. And it's almost like it's Frodo's head. So he wakes up and it's like, oh, I've just seen this battle happen. It's in the unconscious. This is happening in the world below us, the underworld. This is happening in that area. And it's self versus self. And the ideals are being constructed at the moment. Because while there is destruction from the Balrog versus Gandalf, there's also Gandalf saying, I am the person that Saruman should have been, and I will prove it on this battlefield. And Frodo wakes up like, oh, like it's almost like he's coming back into the real, and sort of in that moment.
That's a brilliant. That's a good observation. Actually, I missed that. But that's it's almost like Frodo had his own battle in his own psyche, as well as Gandalf having his actual battle in kind of the real world, so to speak.
Yeah,
that's a good point, mate. Yeah, I missed that one. That's very good.
I genuinely, when I saw that, I thought you'd be on my wavelength there as well. So I'm glad you've enjoyed that bit.
Definitely, yeah.
And so we go on from that, because obviously I do say this a lot. The Balrog is Morgoth's agent. So something that I remember being as a kid was like, oh, why didn't Sauron have like an army of Balrog, of the Maya? And now as an adult, I'm like, it makes sense. They weren't his to control. These are agents of darkness that are basically like Gandalf, in the sense that they are their own beings. They are their own destruction. They are parts of the world.
They're gods in physical form, aren't they?
Exactly. And it is really interesting to look at that first sequence and think, wow, that has such meaning within the first 5 minutes of the film. We haven't even got into the rest of it's right there. We see that Gandalf isn't this weaker person that he's made out to be by his appearance, but rather
he's not an old frail man, is he? Well, they obviously given the appearance of that, but he is actually tough.
I love it. And it's proceeded from there. As I said, Frodo wakes up, and we immediately see within the extended edition that they're sort of, although they're together, Sam and Frodo, they're still really trying to get to grips with what's happened, what they've just seen, and they are not privy to the information that we know, that Boromir's been slain, that the Fellowship has basically been broken, and that their two friends, Merry and Pippin, have been taken away by the Uruk-hai. And so they're still on this quest, and as Galadriel says, on the edge of a knife, which is very, sort of, it makes sense.
Certainly, as the description that Gimli gives of Emyn Muil is that it's an impassable labyrinth of razor-sharp rocks. Well, here's the knife then.
I forgot about that. Yeah, it is razor sharp rocks, and yeah, he says that right at the beginning, and then yeah, oh yeah, he does that little speech, doesn't he? I forgot about that.
And it's an interesting one because I only noticed this on the last rewatch. I do have to be careful about constantly noticing new things because I don't know if my mind is just sort of making them up as it goes along.
Yeah.
But I'll say it anyway because I think it kind of makes sense. It's like Frodo and Sam are lost, and they know where they're trying to get to, but they have no idea how to do it. They can physically do it. It's not like they don't have a skill or anything. It's just that they can see a place, they can't get any closer to it.
Yes.
And as it stands at the moment, they don't have an ideal. Again, that word.
Yeah.
Probably going to use a lot in this.
Would you say, in this context, so Sam is Frodo's ideal, but we haven't met the opposite end of the ideal, so we haven't met the dark.
So it's not like Sam is distinguished in being the ideal yet.
Yes.
But obviously Sam does have a few flaws. But it's almost like Frodo needed to meet the polar opposite of whatever his ideal was, so that he could know, okay, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know how to get where I'm going, but I know that I don't want to go there, so I'll go away from there. Despite the fact that they kind of have to follow Gollum out.
Yes.
You get the picture.
Yeah, because like you said, we're in these sharp rocks. It's very dark grey. It does once again refer back to that unconscious. We're lost. We're beings of light, fumbling around in the dark, sort of thing. And, it's really interesting. And I don't know if you saw this, but Gollum is not necessarily a being of darkness, but he's seen darkness, and he's the guide who takes them into darkness. And it's almost like you can only be guided into the realm of hell by somebody of hell. It's really sort of...
Yeah, I suppose certainly someone who's been there before.
Exactly, yeah. And it does bring to my mind one of Jordan Peterson's rules of saying don't surround your people who don't want the best for you, because it does make me think like Gollum is there for the ring and only the ring. And we clearly see that in the first scene, because there's no other end to this ideal. There is only the darker side that we see, because Sam and Frodo just yank him and they get into a fight, don't they?
Yeah, and certainly when Sam suggests we just tie him up and leave it, that's like, I mean, I know that Gollum isn't exactly a nice character and he's done horrible things, but it's not like I don't know if you can really say that he's pure evil.
No,
certainly, because it's only like he's not really in control.
Yes.
Smeagol is in control. He just influences Smeagol in the wrong way, and so Smeagol is the one who does his dirty work, and so Smeagol is the one who sort of bears the brunt on his soul for all the bad things that he does, and Gollum is just like indifferent, probably horrible as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know about all-out evil. But it's like a what do you call it? Like a misaligned. It's Gollum's own ideal because he follows it. But it's misaligned. He knows it's wrong, but he doesn't have anything else to go by.
Yes.
Until Frodo comes along and takes the rope off him and so on and so forth. So it's like Frodo has the ideal in Sam and the polar opposite in Gollum.
Yes.
And Gollum, in Gollum or Smeagol, and Smeagol has his ideal in Frodo and the polar opposite in Gollum.
Yes. So,
and
so
sort
my,
of wins the battle.
my question here, and you've sort of displayed it nicely there in the sense that, so we've got Sam as Frodo's ideal. We've got the opposite being Gollum, which is the darkest part of Smeagol, and Smeagol, in his own right, is a mixed grey being because he's been corrupted, but he's not necessarily all fully darkness, as you've explained
Yeah, he's
there.
kind of in the middle, isn't he?
So why does he refer to himself as us? Why is there this we?
So, sorry, say that again. The audio cut out there. What did you say?
No, so why does Smeagol or Gollum, in this case, refer to himself as us or we? There's a constant sort of referral to himself as more than one person.
Well, I think he genuinely does have a different personality that's inhabiting his brain, and it exerts enough influence on him that he can actually engage it in dialogue. Obviously, he doesn't. He's obviously scared of it because he doesn't really fight back until, well, as far as we know, he doesn't really fight. He doesn't really fight it until he has Frodo as his ideal, so to speak. But it's yeah, because he refers to it as us or we because it genuinely is a plurality of beings inside one body. So.
Yeah, no, I'm intrigued to see, just because like obviously there's that question's always bugged me a little bit because in my mind that Gollum and Smeagol, it's very physical, something that Peter Jackson clearly shows on screen, and there's obviously it's never really truly talked about. It's only shown, which is beautiful, fantastic cinematography, but it's obviously can be you have to really delve deep sometimes to truly understand the meaning behind it, and that can you know.
and also they kind of when I'm not sure when it is in the story. I know it's before they meet Faramir and stuff, but when Smeagol is telling Gollum to leave, there is some quite clever cinematic camera shots because it's obviously one shot is Smeagol and the other shot is Gollum, and
Yes.
there's clear facial expression changes, tone of voice is different, the language that's used is different, so it's cleverly done.
Yeah, perfectly put. And so we have this sort of almost short beginning. So we're in this sort of grey period, this grey area of, and I don't know how to describe the bit before the marshes. It is these jaggedy rocks, as you've said, that Gimli describes. I don't know the specific name of the area that they're in, so I will just ping it up in post production here on my left.
Yeah, I think it's called Emin Wheel.
Okay,
yeah.
Right. I'm gonna have to remember that one because it's never truly sort of stated, apart from by Gimli, like you said, where Frodo and Sam are, because they go from a forest into a very different sort of textured place, and it's never truly fully sort of explained how they go from there to the dead marshes, because obviously Middle Earth is so big that you've got a map that doesn't necessarily describe to you every bit where Frodo and Sam's route is in the film. But
there are a couple of maps online that you can see where you can see the different routes that the characters of the Fellowship take. I mean, I don't know how detailed they are, but I know that the books were very detailed in terms of the amount of the passage of time because Tolkien used a lot of dates. So like in Rivendell, they were in Rivendell on October 24th.
Yes.
As an example, and I know that Boromir's journey from Minas Tirith to Rivendell took them 110 days. It's just one of those things. It's like I know it's very the books are very specific on it, but also the films because there's for the sake of time we don't need to see everything. So.
Yeah, 100%, because they do the same with the total amount of time that Gandalf's gone in the first part of the film for the Fellowship is they just sort of skim over it, but it's something like 10 years of Frodo's life that Gandalf's gone to Minas Tirith and then come back again. So yeah, definitely.
That's it. I think it's 17 in the books.
Oh really?
So when we first see Frodo, he's 32, and I think in Hobbit terms that means he's kind of just come of age. But when he actually leaves the Shire, he's 50 years old. Yeah,
There you go.
it's a long. Time is not an issue for Gandalf.
Tolkien in his prime is just like, I can use all I want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In my world, time is unlimited.
And in that in those 17 years, you know, they did things like Gandalf was trying to track down Gollum, as he said, it said so in the film. And it was only, and he enlisted Aragorn's help to do that in the books, and it was only once Gollum had been released from the dungeons of Barad-dûr that Aragorn was actually able to capture Gollum, and he interrogated him. And I think, I could be wrong here because it's been a while since I've read the books. I think Aragorn took Gollum to the Woodland King in Mirkwood, to Thranduil, and they imprisoned him for a while, and then he somehow escaped. He's quite a wily character. Yeah, that's obviously that wasn't in the films, but that was those years were. There's a lot of detail in like Unfinished Tales and stuff like that.
There's loads of stuff. There's even Tom Bombadil who just gets skipped over for the most powerful being on the entire Middle Earth.
Yeah, that's a whole that's a whole other.
There's a whole side story. Anyway, back to the movie. So we go from meeting Gollum. We then see a cutscene to the Uruk-hai with Merry and Pippin. So we quickly we have a jump cut almost. So going from one sprint where Frodo and Sam are sprinting after Gollum to the Uruk-hai stopping to meeting the little band of goblins and orcs that they meet. Yes, and this is something that I saw. I'm glad you brought up the book. Is that for the first time in the book is that you actually have an Uruk-hai who speaks within the book, and he's called Ugluk. And he's also called Ugluk in the movie, and he's like the leader of that band of scavengers, or not scavengers, but what are they called? Sort of basically the band that attacked Aragorn and the Fellowship.
The Uruks.
Yes, and they obviously something that always bugged me. I don't know if it's misinformation or if they're thinking that they're basically. Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, there's three of them, and there's a good squadron of Uruk-hai there. I never got my idea why they were scared of three beings, basically.
I think it wasn't that they were scared. It's just that they had a mission, and they weren't as Gimli says later on in the film. They're not a rabble of mindless orcs. They are actually. There is actually something to them. There is some intelligence there, and so there is the mission, and that's more important than the sport. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. So they're more inclined to get Saruman his spoils,
exactly,
and not kill the men, basically.
Yeah, that's it. At least it's like the men aren't. They're not a threat. Really. Because the Uruk-hai, obviously, they don't really tire and stuff. They, as Legolas says, they ride as if the whips of their masters were behind them. But I think in the books, because Legolas is an elf and he doesn't really tire, Aragorn and Gimli do, and in the books, Legolas is kind of constantly having a go at Gimli and Aragorn, saying, "Come on, we've actually got to move." But
I love it. Yeah.
They obviously don't show that in the film because there's no need. But yeah.
It's brilliant.
A mortal man would have trouble running after something that has kind of been bred to be powerful physically.
Yeah, because they're a combination of goblin and orc, orc men. So it is the perfect combo. They can take the sunlight. They're not weakened by it. And I think it's in The Hobbit that Bilbo says that the orcs' stomachs get fuzzy and their heads get wibbly and their legs get wobbly because of the sunlight, which is a lovely description of
that's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Was that in The Hobbit?
Yeah, within The Hobbit, which is a really nice way of basically saying that the goblins and the orcs wouldn't be able to do what the Uruk-hai have said, and that's why they are almost a little bit of a superior race to the orcs.
Yeah, definitely.
Which we see in the sort of hierarchy of we don't answer to you, we only answer to Saruman, basically. Which is nice. But
that's a bit later on, isn't it?
It is. So we see this, and obviously Gimli gives a nice little short sprinter sort of quotation saying we're natural short sprinters and can't run after Legolas and Aragorn, which is brilliant. I always thought that John Reese gave that character its lovability because he's just so funny. Um,
Yeah.
how he deals.
Yeah, he was fantastic. He was the perfect choice for that
Yes.
role.
And Legolas gives us an insight into his vision, his ability to see. And I always thought this was, I was going to bring this to you as a sort of proposition, is sight is such a big thing in this movie. We see the Eye of Sauron tracks and sees Frodo. The eye, Legolas now looks upon Rohan and sees evil. He sees basically the Uruk-hai where they're moving towards because of his vision. And that's something that's commonly brought up by Jung and other sort of psychologists, is the ability to identify, the ability to see and identify evil or sight and accurately describe things is basically one of the ways of the hero. And I think it was Jordan Peterson who said about I don't want to say Ra, I think it was the Horus, that was it, the god of sight.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
Yeah. So go into it a little bit, because I think you could explain it a little bit better than I could in this.
Well, I'm certainly no expert on the Egyptian sun god story, but I do get the idea of sight, because it's not just being able to physically see what's in front of you; it's being able to sort of see the patterns that are played out in the world, and see. Prediction is kind of a form of sight. You can predict that. I don't know what could it be. You could predict that at some point the government in the UK is probably going to have to step down because people aren't going to be happy.
Yeah.
Right. Prediction, but it's a form of sight. It's like an imagination.
Yeah.
Your imagination is saying, "Here's what might happen."
Yes.
And a lot of people have anxiety based on what their brain is telling them could happen.
Foresight.
Rather than what necessarily. Yes. Yeah. Foresight. It's like John Peterson does talk about it in a video. It's about 13 minutes long, and it's on YouTube. It's not on his account, but it's like I think the title is something like Jordan Peterson versus Tyler Durden, from Fight Club.
Yes.
And it's like the ability to pay attention is more important than the ability to think, because thinking likes to pretend it's in charge. It's like it's like to go, no, this is what it is. But whereas attention can go, okay, well, that's one little story, but I can see some stuff over here that you haven't accounted for. So what's going on? And I don't know, I think maybe I'm rabbiting there, but but sight is definitely something that it's used a lot in mythological stories for to show that the hero is I don't know, they can see what's coming almost.
Yeah, exactly. No. I think you're spot on. I think that Legolas is, up to this point, we see him fight and stuff like that. But it's in this movie that we start to get a sort of like humorous side to him. He's not just a one-dimensional character. He foresees futures. He sees into his sight, has the ability to be a great archer, but also he has the ability to see evil and understand good. And that's really nice to see.
He can also, when they go in the third film, when they go into the paths of the dead, Legolas can see the dead, whereas the other two can't. And so maybe there's something to that from like a mythological perspective. Because you remember in the last podcast I said about how the elves seem to have this religion which keeps them strong.
Yeah.
It's almost like that religion is the same thing that gives them eternal life, and it's the same thing that gives them the vision that they can see. They can genuinely distinguish between good and evil. Whereas for mortal men, dwarves, maybe wizards, probably not wizards though, because they're obviously gods as well. Hobbits certainly, they can't really distinguish as easily between what's good and bad.
Which is exactly what we see within Frodo for when he sees Smeagol.
Yeah.
In the sense that we can't really identify what he is, like what's going on.
Yeah. But he can see some good in him. But he doesn't know if it's enough to save him. But I suppose he actually says later on in the film he has to believe. And I think because he can see his own future in Smeagol.
Yeah.
So it's like an act of faith almost. It's like a kind of religious faith that I won't become that if I do the right thing.
Well, there is a scene, I think it's in the Return of the King, that's cut from even the extended edition, that
Okay.
shows Frodo as what he would have become if he'd kept the ring, basically. And
Okay.
so we do see Peter Jackson deliberately did cut it because he didn't need to, because obviously we see that within Bilbo when he has the
Yeah.
scary face, and he thought that that was enough, basically, to remind
Yeah,
Frodo.
just a hint.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think yeah, just the little intimations can often be more powerful than the full on, full frontal display, so to speak.
yes, exactly. And we see within the next sort of, there's a couple of scenes sort of moved within the Urukai scene where we've seen them arrive within Rohan, and we see sort of Legolas see into Rohan. He says there's something wrong here, and basically we've talked about foresight, is that he foresees that, oh no, there's something wrong within this land. Basically, it's not just that
Yeah,
the Urukai are traveling through it, there's something physically poisonous within this land.
yeah, yeah, and Aragorn says the same thing. It's almost like he can feel it. He can't see it, but he can feel it. Maybe because he was raised by the elves. He says that
Exactly.
some evil gives speed to these creatures and sets its will against us.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's a good point actually. Yeah, that's a good point. I like that.
And so we were going from there, and to back that up, a little bit of evidence on top of that is that we see the prince of that land has been thoroughly injured. He's dying. He's been taken down by some of the darkness, by Saruman, the thing that gives speed to these creatures. And we're given in this extended scene within the extended edition, the prince has fallen. He's taken a sword to the gut, basically. And the prince of the land is basically the future of Rohan. And by seeing him
Yeah,
injured, we see that Rohan's future is in jeopardy at the moment. We see this sort of, we're talking about foresight. We physically see there that their future of the land is in jeopardy, and so it backs
yeah,
up that idea that
yeah,
it is
definitely.
poison.
It's the future king is gone basically, isn't it? So it's like,
Yeah,
well, what's going to happen when there's no king in
exactly.
the land? What
Yeah,
happens? And it doesn't. History tells us that it never turns out well if there isn't some kind of ideal. You know, yeah, it's good. Just to backtrack ever so slightly.
yeah. Go,
Well, I
go.
don't know if it might be worth saving it for later. Actually, yeah, I'll save it for later.
Okay.
So yeah, so the king's son is dying.
Yes, and so we have this sort of brewing of darkness, because we see the hill tribes are sort of rising together with the Urukai. We've
Yeah,
got the land being attacked by hillsmen and Urukai. It's in flame, basically. So we go from Legolas and the Urukai being chased, and we physically then see the prince, and then we see Rohan. Basically everything's going wrong for Rohan that could possibly go wrong, basically.
yeah,
Um, and
yeah. I mean,
for,
the king is asleep, isn't he?
yeah, exactly. He's asleep. Yeah,
And
that's a
he's
really good way of putting it.
not
Is
able
that
to do
he's
anything.
not just poisoned; he's physically asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like he's trapped in the unconscious, and I think it's partly because he's got this. You know how we were saying about ideals and stuff.
Mm,
He doesn't have his own ideal anymore.
mm.
But instead he has the polar opposite, and that's in Grima Wormtongue.
Yes.
Obviously,
Yeah. So we only see darkness.
brilliant name. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's like it's the only thing. Like, and he's obviously Wormtongue is obviously going to be speaking the truth because Theoden is smart enough to recognise lies when he hears them. But it's a poisonous kind of truth. You know, it's kind of half truths. You know,
Yes.
black truths, I think, rather than white lies. You know.
It's very true. And to back your point up, there is that how he describes Eowyn. When she sees later on in the movie, he's like, he doesn't call her beautiful. He goes into this whole sort of soliloquy of describing her as cold and in dark, like a way of calling her beautiful, but in this like really dark and twisted way to make you feel like. And she says, "Your words are poison," to
Yeah.
him,
Oh yeah,
because
she does.
he bends the truth to become the way that you're describing it. This black truth, this horrible,
Mm.
just sort of realism to her. That's like, oh god, that's, that's so dark, and we're just sort of like, oh, this man has nothing good about him in him.
No, that's it. Yeah, he doesn't have a good bone inside him. I suppose the promise of riches and the promise of Eowyn from Saruman was enough to sort of corrupt him.
Yes, And
being a man.
it's
He
his.
had desired power, and so he was. I don't know. Maybe he would have been king of Rohan or something like that. If Saruman had his way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this just need for power, the lust for power, isn't there, commonly within these guys?
Well, it's common to the race of men, isn't it? As Gladiator says in the first film, it's the nine mortal men doomed to die. They desire power above all else.
Yes. Yeah, which is I love that sort of theme. It continues to go throughout the entire films of all three.
It's almost like it's almost like proving what was said in the first couple of opening lines. It's like, do you remember what we said here? Well, yeah, this is that.
Evidence. We've got three different people who are going to prove this throughout the film, basically. I love it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very true, because we see later on that Denethor has a very similar setup in Minas Tirith, but we'll get into that later. So we talked about ideals. We've said that Wormtongue is basically the opposite, but we haven't said that the only person, again, foresight, Éomer is the king's nephew, basically, and now direct to the throne, is the only person who seems to be able to see the truth and interpret it in a way that would be for good, and sees through Wormtongue's lies. And basically, Wormtongue blinds Rohan by getting rid of him. And I was wondering, do you see the same thing? Did you, when you saw that he was banished, do you think, that blinds Rohan?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like banishing the best possible kind of man that you would actually want in your society, and it's like saying you're banished because you're dangerous to our rule. You're not, it's not that you're not good. It's that you're dangerous to us. You're good for the other people. And so I suppose you could look at it from a perspective, psychologically at least, that despite the fact that King's son is dead, Éomer could kind of fill the role. For all intents and purposes, he could be the future king of Rohan.
Exactly.
Because he actually is like kingly in his manner. That he's a warrior, he's a good man, so on and so forth. And so having that gone, it's like Grima Wormtongue kind of plunges the entire society into darkness by banishing the highest ideal, the highest good that they would otherwise be.
It 100%, and by doing so, everyone, and this is something that I've continuously seen when interpreting dictators or some sort of negative communist ways, that they always think, well, it was purely Wormtongue. But as we see when Éomer is removed from court, that he has his bodyguards, he has these guys who do his bidding. And so for every single dictator within communism or any sort of dictatorship that we've seen throughout evil times, there's always going to be people who do the deeds for the dictator or for this evil. So it's very easy to just say that, it's all Wormtongue, but actually within Rohan, the poison wasn't just within one man, it was within multiple men who were easily wielded to the darkness. But we don't
definitely.
which is intriguing to see.
Well, it certainly makes perfect sense, because it is like, if you look at what's happening now in places like America and stuff, it's like weak people are causing trouble, basically.
Yes.
It's not strong people. It's not the people who are supposed to be doing the good stuff. They're not gonna go out smashing things to pieces. They're gonna do it properly, the way it should be done. We won't go too far into that, obviously, because it's that'll probably be another whole podcast in itself.
We'll try and not make this one political, bud, but it's a good example nonetheless. It's this ability to allow the weaker people to gain control through bad means, basically.
Yeah, and it's I suppose another form of power, isn't it? It's the will for power. It's like if you give someone who has no agency or no power in their own life, if you suddenly say, well, you're the right person for the job, and we need you to go and kick some guy's face in. Well, they might just do it because they might think, well, if I'm the good person, then that's that. Then I'm a good person, so I'll do what I'm told. And so.
Yep, 100%, and it's a reference to Robert Browning's Ordinary Men.
Exactly, yeah.
exactly
Well,
that,
I
isn't
mean,
it?
it certainly could be that, but Ordinary Men is more about men who are supposed to be kind of good, you know, because they were a police battalion in
Yeah.
Poland, I think it was, and so they were supposed to kind of be the ideals of, well, maybe not the ideals, but they were kind of supposed to be the peacekeepers of society. And
Yes.
these guys look, these guys that we see in the film, they kind of look no more than common thugs.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
it's just
So
like,
so the
oh,
the
you mean I get a chance to kick some guy's teeth in? Yeah, I'll happily do that. And it's like,
yes.
like, do you really want to do that? Like, can you really be that good if you want to do that? There is the Alexander Solzhenitsyn line, which is that the line separating good and evil runs down the center of every man's heart is kind of coming to mind there. I'm not sure how exactly it fits in, but it is certainly springs to mind.
It does, because you can see there that the guys who basically yield themselves to Wormtongue are actually more to the darker side, like you say, and they have they are there to happily deal with the evil deeds, basically, like you say. And as we see with Aemir being kicked out of court, it's not lightly; it's done with force.
Yeah, he gets roughed up, doesn't he?
He does, definitely. And from there, Aemir, I have such respect for him, because he doesn't just like he doesn't go out without a bang, because he goes on to then slaughter all of the Uruk-hai.
Yeah.
He's then like, you know what, I'm going to do a good deed before I leave, basically, you know, which is kind of like, you know, he didn't have to do this. He was just riding in that general direction. But
I suppose it's another it's another Gandalf fighting the Balrog kind of thing.
yeah,
It's like your ideal is dead, and what
mm,
to do? Where you're in hell, and then he goes and he fights all the demons, and he rids the land of demons, so to speak, and then he's then in charge of all his men, isn't he?
yes,
I
and
mean, he was already, but it's like he is now. He's the new king, so to speak. In that
yes, and he leads his men into a place where he feels that could be lesser hell than already in.
Yeah,
Basically.
yeah, exactly.
And it's funny because that backs again. We've got another line by Legolas, which then basically refers to that. He's like, "Oh, blood has been spilt this night," and we get a red sun in the background to represent that. And it's like hell has risen with the day for the first time. We see this sort of like darkness rise with the light because of the colouring used on the screen. And we then move on to have Éomer sort of, although we're privy to this information, the three guys, the Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, they have no idea that this has happened, and so they're sort of given a small pieces of information to basically say, your foresight was true. Basically, this land is in chaos at the moment, and we've just slaughtered where your friends could have been, and their chase has been ended with terrible news. And I was wondering, do you
And
think
they're
how could
obviously
this been
exhausted.
interpreted?
Well, I'm not 100% certain on like any kind of mythological value, but I can certainly say that like if you pursue a worthwhile goal,
Mm.
and once you get to the end, and it's like physically taxing, mentally taxing, and it takes a while, and so on and so forth, and then you find out that you failed.
Yeah.
Without and it's like you failed in a way that wasn't your fault, but you're still the one who suffers. You imagine how defeated you would be at the end of that chase.
Yes.
Because they've just been running basically non-stop for like a week.
Yeah.
Only to find that it's like, oh, they're dead. Oh,
yeah.
Well, what do we do now? And it's like, I suppose it's another, at least momentarily, you would definitely be in hell if you thought that if you thought your friends had died despite your best efforts.
And we see the individuals, how they react. We've got Legolas who's saying an elvish prayer, Gimli lowering his head, but Aragorn lets out a raw scream of just utter pain, like you say, to basically just to resemble that, and for good reason, like you said.
Yeah. I mean, it's like some children have been murdered, basically. That's what they feel like. That's what
Yeah. And although bit of backstory behind that is that everyone knows this fact. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, everyone knows it. Is Vigo breaks his toe doing that kick. It's such a fun fact to know because the man's a badass. Let's be honest. Like, if you kick your toe and you break it and you continue to act, you get props for life, basically. Like, there's no way about it. Like, everyone was like, "Yes, sir." Just like.
Yeah, it was a good scream as well because it didn't sound like a scream of pain, did it? It was
No.
like a frustration.
Yes. And the kneel
Yeah.
down, it was perfect. You can't
Yeah.
knock him. That is brilliantly done. And later on in the film, this is what gets to me about Viggo Mortensen. Is like he's such a classy actor. Is he did that, and then he later on in the Battle of Helm's Deep, he cracks his tooth on a sword. And there's a photo of him where it's like a diagonal straight cut across his front tooth, where someone's literally swung the sword and it's like connected directly and snapped it in half. And
lucky he didn't take his head off.
Mate, yeah, exactly. it's this just ability to just continue filming even though you've taken all these injuries, and it shows the perfection for his character, but also is that he's the type of person that we should all sort of have an ideal, as you've been using the ideal, is that he shows that in strength you can conquer even the things that are going to stop you from achieving your goal, which is it's fun to see in the behind the scenes, and I do like hearing little stuff like that. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a little fun little story. It must be so much fun to make these films.
Mate, I love every bit of footage that they have is always fun to see, and one of my favourites is that Sean Bean is afraid of heights, and therefore he walked up the mountain every time they wanted to film on mountains.
Yeah, I heard that because all the other actors took a helicopter ride, didn't they? It was like a 20-minute helicopter ride, and Sean Bean had to hike for like 3 hours or something.
It's crazy.
He had to do that in costume as well.
Yeah, it's madness, isn't it? It's like he's again another actor who's just willing to commit to the role. How do you have all of these guys grouped together and they're all willing to just give it all for this one role?
Well, I mean, it's the greatest story ever told, and obviously, if they'd read the books and stuff, and they held the stories in as high regard as anyone else, really, they would have obviously had an enormous amount of respect for the material. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the ability to, understand the importance of how this story should be told, but also they enjoy the process. The process of telling the story is also really important, and you can tell that because they to this day they all reconvene and meet each other every now and then, which is
I know that they all got a tattoo, didn't they?
They did, yes.
They got the same tattoo. I forget what it was. Was it
I think it was an elvish symbol.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it said the elvish number is 9, as in the 9 fellows. Anyway, back to the movie. So we then see basically that Aragorn manages to track the children, the hobbits. They're not dead, and him being the amazing tracker that he is able to figure out that they've gone into Fangorn Forest. And Gimli goes on to say what madness drove them in there. So what madness did drive them in there, Ollie? What do you think? What was the madness in their minds?
Well, I suppose Leonard Cohen said that there's no good place to stand in a massacre, and I suppose that the hobbits, there's no better way of describing where they were. They were in a massacre, and so it's like, well, you either stand still and get completely trampled on,
yes,
or you just run. You just see where you end up, and so that obviously the first place they could have gone where they would have been out of sight would have been some trees, and so that was,
Oh, that's a perfect description. I had no idea Leonard Cohen said that, but fair play.
Yeah, that literally just came to mind as well, so I'm happy with that.
Yeah, it should be, bud.
my little encyclopedia of sayings and quotes and stuff that served me well there.
Click. It's because we're talking about the meaning of it all. It's good. It's good. But we see immediately. Obviously, they've sprinted in. They're being chased by evil. They're being chased by one of the orcs, and we are once again delving into a very similar thing of the unconscious again, because the trees talk, and it's a very strange place to be.
Yeah, it is very strange, and I suppose actually from the perspective of the unconscious is that the unconscious is made up of living personalities, so they do Whether or not you can understand them is a different story, of course. But I think when I was watching the film, I think I got a bit caught up on the whole idea of the character's ideals appearing at the right time. I don't think it necessarily works with Merry and Pippin, but I'll say it anyway. But they just escaped hell, right? They're running away. And they have no, as I said, no highest ideal. But they run into Treebeard, and obviously Treebeard is kind of he's a good being, you know, he's a good soul, and he obviously saves them from what you could effectively equate to being the devil, which is in that orc thing that was chasing them. So saying it was going to rip out their innards.
It's true. Yeah.
You'd have to be pretty evil to do that to a child, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So he was obviously pretty low down there, and so I suppose like polar opposite appears in Treebeard, and he saves them and you know takes them on their way. And I was trying to work it out whether Treebeard was their ideal or whether Gandalf was their ideal, because obviously he takes them to meet Gandalf. But yeah.
Well, let me throw a spanner in the works then. Almost is that Merry and Pippin are very speedy, and we see, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. Is that they have a lot of energy. There's so much going on with them. They are very happy beings. They are children in the sense of who they are. And we see in the previous film that they are, you know, they're scoundrels. They steal. They do all these little things, like they set off fireworks. They're brilliant.
They're like mischievous, aren't they? They're like tricksters almost, but not in an evil way.
Exactly. And so we see them being chased by evil, but I think Treebeard is the opposite ideal, not necessarily the ideal that they're looking for, but maybe the opposite of who they are, because he's slow, he's still good, but he's a little bit, he takes his time with stuff, and he'll slowly get you there to the point where they're extremely fast with how they're doing things. They're running away physically, and he's stronger and they're weaker.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good, definitely a good point.
And I was thinking to myself, is that the White Wizard being Gandalf? Obviously, we don't know it's Gandalf at this point. I mean, we've seen the film so many times that it's like, oh, we're going to see Gandalf sort of thing. But if you see the film for the first time, you're thinking, oh no, he's about to see Saruman. Like, you know, this is a bad. You were going from worse to worse at the moment because they're thrown at the feet of the White Wizard.
Yeah, it kind of, we don't actually know whether Treebeard is good or bad at this point, do we?
Exactly.
Like, well, maybe he's actually either he's bad or maybe he's just been duped and thinking that Saruman is still good. So.
Yes, and he says that I'm on. Treebeard said, "Side? Whose side? I'm on no one's side because no one's on my side," and that again backs up your point that he's just sort of like you don't know where he stands, and so. Is nature a prominent element within the Two Towers? Because we see it in this sort of sense, but we don't see it necessarily in previous film or in the Return of the King.
I mean, we don't necessarily see it in Return of the King in as obvious detail, but obviously we do have Shelob or Shelob.
Yes.
How do you pronounce that? I think it's Shelob.
Shelob, yeah.
And obviously that's like a terrible force of nature, and there certainly is mythological context there. I'm not as much as I like to think I am. I'm not an expert on the mythological archetypal ideas and stuff, but I definitely think that grappling with one's own nature, because obviously our nature is very powerful. You know, for human beings, we have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to drink. There's certain biological things that they're not up for negotiation at all, really. The only negotiation might be when they're satiated, but obviously if you try and control it too much, it might bounce back the opposite way. You know, you see that with eating disorders and so on. And another side of nature is going to be personality traits. And you can imagine, you know, the 7 deadly sins in Christianity. So you have, you know, anger, sloth, pride. You can imagine that these are all sort of sins of the body. You know, that it's like the human animal can take over at times. You can become uncontrollably angry. You know, you can be really, really prideful. You can be really, really lazy to the point where your life falls apart, and so on and so forth. I don't know necessarily how I can link this to Treebeard and stuff, and things in Lord of the Rings, but there definitely is a mythological context for the elements of nature.
Yes.
Animals typically are used. There is a in the ancient Greek story of Prometheus stealing fire from Zeus and giving it back to humanity. There are several stories worldwide from different societies that have a very similar story. And a lot of the time what happens is the fire is passed on from the god to an element of nature, usually an animal. And quite often the fire burns the animals, and it's kind of like a relay race. And the animals pass the fire to each other, and as it burns them, it leaves them with their, colourful plumage, so to speak, and their different, the different designs, the different patterns you see on their fur and that sort of thing. So there definitely is something to nature.
Yes.
I'm not sure I could really pin it down though.
No, I do know what you're trying to get at as well, because we almost see that. I'm pretty sure that it's either Legolas or someone of the Elven kin who basically described that the elves gave the trees the ability to speak in the first place. So they are given speech as a power and is passed between them. And so they're taught it amongst themselves, so through whispers. So, like you said, they are marked individually, and we see different characteristics within each tree. And with little bits of light between them, they have their different characters and their different ways of speaking. So I think you're definitely getting at something there, and I think it's sort of shown in
circling around something. I'm sure if anyone who actually knows anything about Yum listens to this, they might be screaming at their phones. So, like how obvious it is that maybe I just can't see it. Whatever it is.
Doesn't matter. I'm sure.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Down the line, we'll be able to figure something out. I mean, it's all up for interpretation, and I don't think that JR would have wanted it any other way, apart from that. We see this ability to speak. We are then presented with the return of Gandalf, and I don't. Do pause me if I've skipped anything. I don't think we have. I think we are in the forest. We have thrown Merry and Pippin at the feet of Gandalf.
Yeah, I think we're in the right place.
And from there, we have the trio basically wander into the forest and are prepared to fight Saruman. And I do love I don't know about you.
Who Legolas can see again before the others can see the White Wizard approaches.
Yes, yeah, whispers it. It's like, just sort of something so powerful might hear us. His ears are everywhere. His power is that great. I do like that Legolas fires an arrow at him, and Gandalf just flicks it away with a staff. Like there's no, we don't see any sort of retribution for it. It's just I've got the power.
There's no animosity, is there?
Yes.
That's actually, I don't know whether it necessarily applies in this case. I think it does though, because they do basically try and attack him.
Yeah.
Without obviously knowing who it is. But there's an element. I only really figured this out when I was watching Captain America: Civil War.
Okay.
And there's an element that, like, in the true heroic sense, that forgiveness is an ultimate virtue. Because if you remember Civil War,
yes,
when Steve, Bucky, and Tony go to the bunker in Russia, in Siberia, the moment Tony admits what he did was wrong, he doesn't even apologize. Steve forgives him straight away.
Yes.
Straight away. There's no animosity. He just says, "It's good to see you, Tony," and that's it. And it's kind of like the same thing. It's like, I know that you didn't mean that. So we're totally fine. It doesn't even need to be said.
Yes.
You don't even need to ask for forgiveness or anything. It's just it's totally cool.
No, I think you're right, and I think his appearance reflects that. The pure white, he's pure. His thoughts, his mind, it's that Buddhist Zen sort of vibe coming from Gandalf.
He's been purged with the fire almost, isn't he? But he's been purged with the darkness, I suppose.
Yes.
But only by going in and assimilating it has he been able to do that.
had to be able to gain this power. He had to go through fire and ash and hell and go to the lowest dungeon of and smite.
And he actually says through fire and water, and obviously water is kind of symbolic of the unconscious, and fire fire purifies, doesn't it? It burns off all the dead wood, the stuff that you don't need. And I suppose that he kind of went through I suppose you could call it like a shamanic initiation, really. It's like a purification process he went through.
I like that. Yeah, because he's fighting against the opposite of him, and therefore he's cleansed of this darkness that he's had to encounter.
Exactly.
By doing so, though, by taking that step forward.
By voluntarily stepping forward and actually trying to fight it. And then he's more powerful as a result, because he actually won. So.
This is a really significant moment in the film, because you think that Gandalf's return is almost like the turn of the tide, because
he says that, doesn't he?
Yeah, he comes back at the turn of the tide, doesn't he? And he says that, and it is. He is. I don't think he's trying to blow his own horn in any way, but he comes back at the best time, because Rohan's on fire, Minas Tirith is weak and sort of held by a fake king, and Osgiliath is weak, and Mordor is strong and has armies returning to it, and so. By him arriving at this moment, he's sent by the gods to basically, as he says, turn the tide. And
definitely.
It's really
it's
interesting.
At a moment where sorry to interrupt. It's at a moment where the three hunters they don't have any goal now. They don't have any kind of ideal. They're just wandering around in this forest, and they have absolutely no idea what to do.
That's really well put. Yeah.
All of a sudden, an ideal appears. The savior appears, so to speak.
Yes, and he reassigns them almost a new assignment, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he gives them a new goal.
Yeah. And it's this new goal that basically puts Aragorn on his path to become king, doesn't it? It is this start is his beginning for that. And from here we've got like I said, the turn of the tide we've had, but we haven't talked about how Smeagol and the Marshes, basically, there's a scene in between this and Aragorn, Gandalf, and Gimli and Legolas returning to Rohan. They've got the scene where Frodo, Sam, and Smeagol are going through this sort of foggy, smoggy, disgusting bog that but contains faces of the dead.
Underwater as well.
Yeah, water, and this is, for me, basically the representation of a previous war on the unconscious that I was fascinated by. When I was watching the film, I sort of paused it because I wanted to go research basically the battle behind it, and it turns out that it is how the final stand of men get to Mordor. They have to have this battle here on the marshes.
So this is like a battle before the Battle of the Five Armies.
So before the armies get into Mordor and they fight the last line against Sauron, they have to fight to get there in the first place. And as Smeagol says, it's like it's a massacre. There's just like so much. I mean, they eventually win, but they lose so many men in the process. And you can see that in the water and the dead. And I was thinking to myself, like, what's the relationship between Frodo and these, this loss of life, these men, these ghosts in the water? Do you know? Did you see that at all? Was there anything that came to mind when you were seeing this?
There probably was. I'm trying to work it out. I can't really. Nothing that springs to mind too much. There's a few sort of vagaries that I have. One of them is I suppose that these men are. They went into battle and they lost, but they're kind of in a sense still alive, and they're trapped there. And it's almost like the word hollow, the term hollow men springs to mind, or hollow criminals, and I think that's wrong, to be fair. It's almost like they were doing their duty. They put on the uniform, the armor, and they marched into battle, and it didn't work out for them. and so now they're kind of bitter that what they were told to do or what they thought was the right thing to do didn't actually turn out to be the right thing. This could be totally wrong though, because obviously the Dead Masters, I don't know, maybe it's maybe there's some enchantment or something that keeps them there. I'm not sure.
No, you're right. I mean, I was always intrigued by the sort of statement that Smeagol Gollum makes, where he says, "Don't follow the lights," because there's little fires burning throughout the marsh, and it's sort of significant in the sense that what is keeping these these souls here, and they're not good souls. Let's be honest. Like when you see the Frodo fall into the water, they're pretty frightening.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine that time itself has corrupted them in some sense. They've been there for so long that they're kind of tired of existence and stuff. So that could certainly be one of the causes there. I suppose one of them is I hate to use the word ideal again. But it's like the lights kind of signify this. The lights are supposed to signify the way, but the way for them led them into the water, and they're stuck there.
Yes.
And so it's almost like they're annoyed at that. I don't know. I'm not sure on that one. I might have
they could be almost so they're not happy with their ending, and so they don't accept their death.
Yeah, maybe they can't let go.
Yeah, but that's really me clutching at straws, if I'm honest.
Yeah, that's what it feels like for me as well. It's almost like maybe they didn't experience the ego dissolution they were supposed to experience, and so they're still following kind of a hollow future, hollow path, in the lights. That if the lights guide the way, the lights are wrong, and they don't want to admit that.
Yeah, which is funny because Gollum's an agent of darkness, so therefore he wouldn't want to follow the lights anyway.
No, that's true. Well, Gollum, and they also have another goal as well. So they know that their way is not guided by those lights, those particular lights.
Yes. Yeah, very, very interesting. And I wasn't looking for a particular answer there, mate. It's just that this is a very strange scene within the movie because there's not really any reason. Obviously, they're journeying, but there's not really a lot of reason for Frodo to interact with the water. Maybe to sort of symbolize his ability to interact with the Nazgul realm. The unconscious there, and still see people like that. But there's not a lot of, like I said, I'm clutching at straws here because there isn't a lot that the story contextualizes for this scene.
It doesn't really expand it very much, does it?
No.
I'm not sure if it does in the book. I know that the book is the end of the Two Towers. They are fighting with Shelob. So I forget how quickly they sort of traverse, the different stages they go through.
Yeah. No, I know the film's a lot better than the books. So I've only read the books like once or twice, if I'm honest. So I'm not the man to reference those, sadly.
No, I'm not. I don't see.
Yeah. But we'll move on from that scene because there's, like I said, there's not a lot I can really sort of pick into for me personally. And so we've seen that scene. We're then taken to Treebeard and Merry and Pippin, and this is just a little scene. There's not a lot going on. It's them. They're taking the sort of the kids to the safe place, the roots of the mountain. So they're taking them to a safe area.
And where they drink that water.
Yes, it is. I found that really funny because it was like almost a reference to the first book where Frodo, Sam, and Merry and Pippin get caught in the roots of a tree, and it's Tom Bombadil who has to rescue them from the roots of the tree.
Yeah, I think that was that scene kind of replaced that scene from the book.
Yes.
Because I don't think that happens again when they're in Fangorn. Although I could be wrong.
No. No, it seems to only happen the once. But
it's a funny scene though.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's followed quite quickly by quite a dark scene because Saruman goes on to speak about the heir of Numenor, which is Aragorn, and he has this little monologue. Wow! So this is, we've had this just quite joyous scene of how the fact that Pippin's grown a few inches over Merry, and
yeah. We've definitely we've skipped a bit, although I think because the three hunters and Gandalf, they haven't yet made it to Rohan.
No, but that doesn't happen for a while. You've got
Oh, okay.
yeah, that's a couple of scenes away. I know this movie. There's a whole few mini cutscenes.
Yeah.
Between Gandalf being revealed in Fangorn and then him going to Rohan and restoring Rohan, basically.
Yeah, and actually, when they leave Fangorn,
yes,
and it's another element of nature that picks Gandalf up, isn't it?
Yes.
It's the Shadowfax.
Oh yeah, I forgot to. Yeah, that's my bad. Yeah, I forgot to speak about Shadowfax. I'm glad you said about that because Shadowfax is like so pure and like the Lord of all horses. I love that statement. What do you think about Shadowfax?
It is. I think it's another. What would you call it? It's like. I'm trying to think of the right word here. It's like perfect nature or pure nature almost. Or like benevolent nature. That's probably what I'm looking for. It's benevolent nature. It's like Gandalf has fully individuated himself. He's fully assimilated the darkness, and he has become his own ideal. And because of that, his entire being, his physical being, which you can include the horse in that, it's in perfect alignment with his goals, so it's not going to get in his way. And so his physical being, which is Shadowfax in this sense, takes him wherever he needs to go without fuss,
No, that's a really nice way of putting it, mate. I think that you're right in saying the purity is reflected not only on his transportation, but also by him, which is it's a fun little connection there, isn't it? I'm glad you brought that up because we then, you've got this purity and referring it to Saruman, we have this scene that you referred to in the last podcast. I love this scene. It's the extra scene within the Two Towers. It is the air of Numenor, like where Gandalf and Aragorn are stood watching, like overlooking onto Rohan, and they're having a conversation. Do you remember this scene at all?
Is this one where they've just left Fangorn when Shadowfax arrives, or
yes, yeah,
because
they're like midway, sort of like they're traveling, sort of, and they've stopped. I don't think this is in the feature film, but they talk together. It's a very important scene because I kind of, it annoyed me a little bit, but it's like Gandalf still saying that Frodo and Sam have kept the ring secret. And he's just having a one-on-one conversation with Aragorn, and I believe that you referenced it.
I don't, unless I'm getting confused with the timeline here, because I thought they went as soon as we kind of met Shadowfax and Gandalf, we went straight to Rohan, and we see the three horses riding across the Westfold, which is burning in the background, and then they arrive ahead of us.
Yeah, there's so did I, if I'm honest. But the order's a little bit strange in the movie because before they arrive, you've got the Black Gate of Mordor as well.
Oh, they got there already. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you've got that cutscene there as well. So before you even get to Rohan, you've got Frodo and Sam arriving at the Black Gate with Gollum. But to be honest, that is quite a significant scene as well because you think about it, what would have happened to Frodo and Sam if they just tried to sneak in that little gap?
That would have been the end of the story.
Can you imagine just the end? It's all over. It's bad news for the Fellowship. We cocked up. Can you imagine like Elrond's face when he realises that he sent him down the wrong route?
It'd be like it just have his hand on his forehead, just like, oh, for God's sake.
What have I done?
Yeah.
But I love
actually the Black Gate because it's like I think I messaged you. What did I say in my message? Because obviously I was trying to work out what the ring kind of meant.
Yes.
archetypal mythology.
Let's have a look. I can have a look it up while we're here.
Just getting the thing up as well. So I said, I think the ring is partly the recognition of the shadow and the journey Frodo takes is a conscious exploration of darkness and his failed attempts to not succumb to it. So I think what it is obviously there to grow up, in the psychological sense, you have to assimilate some of your shadow, or a lot
Yes.
of all of your shadow, hopefully.
Yeah.
But you have to also not succumb to it, because there are going to be parts of you that are genuinely bad.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about necessarily evil, but there are definitely going to be parts of you that are not going to be aimed at.
Well, yeah, we all have the like you said earlier, the 7 deadly sins. We all have that to challenge ourselves, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. And it's like you have to know about these things within yourself, and you have to recognise that they're there. But you also have to recognise when they appear, and you have to not be overtaken by them. You not have to be possessed by, let's just say, the demon of anger, so to speak. And I guess the Black Gate would kind of represent a quick transition into the darkest parts of the shadow.
Yes, and it's like a nice little representation of hell, isn't it? In simpler terms.
Exactly, yeah. And it's almost like, because obviously the goal is to go in there, but not be overtaken by it.
Yes.
It's almost like perhaps by going in through the Black Gate, you would circumvent all the work that you're supposed to do before you actually get there. If that makes sense.
Which is, it's funny that it's Gollum who stops them from going in.
Yeah.
Because he is. Yeah, it's just like the lowest idea is like, actually, guys, maybe that's not a good idea, entering the front gate of of hell, and have the Easterlings spot you.
And certainly because obviously they're children, they have no conscious exploration of the shadow anyway. It's like it would just overwhelm them entirely. Maybe later on, because obviously in the Return of the King, the armies of Gondor actually do go to the Black Gate.
Yes.
Maybe it's like you can go there, but only once you've gone through hell anyway. Like,
and also that's like an army of light, isn't it? Like that's an army of light facing off against the darkness in somewhere.
I don't necessarily know about light. Certainly force for good, but obviously the individual beings are made up of darkness and light, and the idea is to have them be not at odds with each other. And so perhaps by going through the gate the first time that you approach the unconscious, or you approach the shadow, you would be lost to it. But once you've been in there, you can kind of come and go at will. But it maybe is still dangerous, something like that.
Yeah. No, they make that very clear that, that even though they're going a different route than going through the Black Gate, it's still going to be dangerous. It's still going to definitely sort of challenge them as people, which is obviously, you've spoken about Shelob already. That will be another act of natural disaster that will be befell upon them. And so there's this path, and we haven't even, later the Return of the King really does show the darkest part of Frodo and Sam's journey. So the two Towers just bring it up a little bit, but it gets a lot darker.
Definitely.
And so, I was saying about that extra scene. You've actually put it in the chat between you and me. The photo of Gandalf and Aragorn is the scene I'm referring to.
That is the one, is it?
That is the exact scene.
So they're not at Edoras at the moment?
No, they're not. No, this is before Edoras.
Fine. Okay.
And you've summed it up perfectly, so I'm going to let you take this one here.
What did I say? So I remember that when they first meet Gandalf again in Fangor, he's speaking to them, and he's basically, Gandalf almost acts as like the narrator for the audience.
That's it.
Sets the scene. It basically tells us what's going on in kind of a metaphorical sense, and then we see it played out. And obviously Aragorn says, "You still speak in riddles," which I thought was quite good.
Yes. That's exactly what. And when I spoke to you about it, it's so important because Gandalf understands the way of the world. He is the guide that is not just for Frodo and Sam initially. He was the guide for all of us.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
really interesting to see that Aragorn is like us. He's like, "What are you talking about? Like, I don't understand what's going on here. Do
I
tell, though."
suppose you could kind of equate Gandalf's role in a sense with Horus. It's like the god of attention. It's like there is a lot going on that you need to be paying attention to, and Gandalf is the one that tells everybody, that shows everyone
Mm.
that hey, there's a problem over here, we need to deal with it. And I suppose it's like Aragorn's ability of foresight has just sprung into being because of Gandalf. So now he can see a little bit further ahead. Not necessarily, see into the future, but he can kind of see what's, the patterns that might be played out, like I said earlier.
Yes. And he plans it out really nicely, and it does. He comes back and he does sort of nicely fit in with that plan and that sort of how the story unfolds.
Yeah.
And so he plays with time very well, doesn't he? Because he does say later in the film, "Look for me on the the fifth day of the third morning. Look for me at dawn to the east." Very specific instructions. It's almost like he knows what's going to happen before it happens. Again, bringing up that foresight.
Yeah.
And so now, finally, after we talked about all these little cutscenes that break all that bit up between Fangorn, and then finally they arrive at Rohan. So they finally get to Idris, and they have to address the problem that is Wormtongue and the poison mind of the king. And it's
I like it as they rock up. Obviously, like the flag falls to the ground. And, it's like the kingdom is in ruin, basically.
Yeah.
But I like Gandalf's little. Obviously, Gandalf is very articulate, as everyone is in these stories, because the language is so rich. But I love the insult he gives to Wormtongue.
Yes.
He says, "I've not travelled through fire and death to exchange." Oh, what does he say? It's like exchange words with a witless worm.
Yes.
Or something like that.
He says, "Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth."
Yeah, that's it. It's so devastating because it's immediately saying, "I know exactly who you are, so get out of my way." Like there's nothing you can say to me to make me think otherwise. To you can't trick me with your language because I know who you are.
Yes.
You're bad. Yeah, I really liked it. It was such a it must have cut Grim and Wormtongue to the bone to hear that.
Right, and then he notices that he still has his staff, and he's like, "You've still got his unlimited power here. It's like, what have you done? I asked you guys to do one job. You failed."
Yeah.
And
I wonder what staff represents. I wonder if that's
probably something intellectual, something like knowledge or something along those lines.
Certainly, I've certainly toyed with the idea in the past of the ability to fight is kind of akin to the ability to use your speech or use your language to get what you want. I don't know. Maybe the staff is like the representation of a higher ideal for Gandalf. Because without his staff, he doesn't have as much power.
Yes.
And without his staff, he is kind of just a man. Obviously, he is still a god in human form, but his powers are kind of limited. It's almost like with Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thor and his hammer.
Yes.
It's like it's almost like he's nothing without his hammer. It's not the case. But his power is kind of limited in its expression without a channel for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. His ability it's a catalyst. Like in a science lab, you have the catalyst to basically get the experiment to work, and that's how he channels his energy, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and it's like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Odin, the character Odin, has access to something called the Odin Force, and the way he channels it is through his staff, which I forget the name of that. Or I think it's a spear actually.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
Odin does make a nice little comment, doesn't he, to Thor? He says, "Are you Thor, god of hammers?"
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's no like you don't have this hammer. You have the power. Like that's why Gandalf is able to. Initially, he uses his staff, doesn't he, to try and get rid of the darkness from Theoden. But what he really does is he moves when he realizes that Saruman's in control of Theoden. He's like he's like, my staff will not be enough, so I shall remove my robe and show thee the
Yeah,
light.
yeah,
And it's him who is the power. So that's a nice
yeah,
little sort of
yeah, and it's like he obviously uses his language to get rid of Saruman.
yes,
But it's also like I suppose at the same time he gives Theoden another ideal in a sense.
yes, he does because
Which is
even
quite nice.
though he's in a dream, an unconscious dream, he needs something to remove the poison from his mind.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And Saruman is that poison, and it's fantastic imagery of when you see Gandalf the White arrive, the ideal that Saruman should have been, and Saruman now looks at Gandalf and he's like, "Oh, Gandalf the Grey," and he's not aware that Gandalf arrives as basically a new form.
Yeah,
It would
because he didn't
be
know he died. He? Yeah.
yes, and he returns all bright and shining. Um,
Mm.
and it's fantastic because you see Saruman just fly across from his seeing
Yeah.
stone, like his ability to see, his ability to articulate, and he's removed from that ability to see.
Yeah, it's almost reminiscent of the wizard fight they had in Fellowship
Yes, and
when
this
they're
time,
throwing each other on the ground.
yeah,
And this time Gandalf actually wins.
yeah, I love it. I think it's brilliant
Yeah.
because I think it's Theoden who says after that, he says, "Dark have been my dreams of late." Very relevant to what we've been talking about. He has been
Yeah,
falling into a dream again. You know, this
yeah, definitely.
dark.
I forgot he said that, and it's like yeah, he was definitely in the realm of the unconscious, and he was
Yeah,
lost in there.
yeah,
And
I
it's like
love it.
the guiding light.
Yeah, and so I think we're going along the right lines at the moment. I think that these sort of like little snippets of text that I'm seeing in the film that they are backing up these ideas, and Saruman is that sort of he has the ability to traverse in the realms of the unconscious, it seems, and so does Gandalf because they're gods in human form and they have
Yeah,
understanding of that knowledge. And it was fun. I loved it. You know, when I was younger, seeing two wizards fight in the first film, but this is more metaphorical, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. It's more the use of language, isn't it? It's like we spoke in the last podcast about how in Judeo-Christianity, in the Judeo-Christian mythology, God uses the spoken word to create the world,
Yes.
and it's kind of like if you imagine that humanity has a very dulled down version of that same power. We can use language to manipulate reality to our will, so to speak. And obviously, Gandalf being a wizard, he's much more powerful in that sense. So he can obviously generate the good, he can generate the reality that he kind of wants to generate.
Yes.
And it's lucky for the people of Middle Earth that he actually wants the good, not the bad.
Yes.
Because obviously
Yeah.
Saruman wants the bad.
Exactly, and he generates that the will to. I think it's the first one of the first scene of the film, the will to dominate all life, is very
Yeah,
much where Saruman has gone, and he wants to dominate others, and he wants to use his words to be able to manipulate others. But
yeah.
Gandalf is not the same, is he?
It's almost like Saruman fell to the lowly status of a mortal man in doing
Mm,
so, in doing what he did, because he wanted the power. I think
yes.
in the from what I remember, again, obviously I haven't read the books for a long time, but I think the story is basically that Saruman knew that there was no, or he thought that there was no hope against Sauron
Yes.
if he had the ring, and so he thought it made sense to just join them because then at least he would survive.
Yeah.
But yeah, but obviously he also was his plan ultimately was to deceive Sauron, the deceiver, and take the ring for his own, because he would be able to wield it because he was powerful enough.
Yes, because he started to become his own ego. Like, the more powerful he became, the more he sort of fell into his own sort of like his pride was the thing that
Yeah,
he
yeah.
started to believe in his own pride.
He confused himself with whatever ideal he should have had. And
Yes.
obviously his ideal probably should have been something, akin to a genuine, real God.
Yes.
But because he was a God in human form, maybe,
Mm.
maybe he identified too much with the God in himself and not the humanity in himself, and because of that, he dropped down to humanity's level, which is pretty lowly.
Yes, exactly.
Something
He
like that.
becomes the very being that he is almost meant to be imitating. So he's a god, but he became the thing that he's imitating.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is kind of it's almost sort of like a trickster in the sense that he's realized that he has become his own trick.
Yeah, definitely. It's like he didn't realize he was tricked by himself.
Yeah. So silly. But Gandalf said something fun after this, where he's getting Theoden to come out of his like dark sort of dreams, and he's obviously he's got rid of Saruman, but he says, your fingers would remember themselves if they were to grasp his sword once again. And I think like that's so metaphorically beautiful, because he, by grabbing the sword, he is able to defend his country once more. He is able to withstand as a man and take the responsibility that he has as a king forward. And if he just emerged from the dream and was unable to, stand or fight, then he is no longer the person he used to be. So
yeah, definitely. It's like he's rediscovered what the person he should have been.
Yeah.
Obviously, he made a mistake in his first thoughts being that of vengeance towards Wormtongue.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, because Aragorn, the future king of a different area, like another, born king, stops him from striking somebody down in anger.
Yeah, and it's like he's obviously Aragorn was probably looking for Theoden to be kind of an ideal or a character to emulate.
Yes, somebody to look up to.
But he had to. Yeah, exactly. And it's like if one day he is going to be king, he obviously needs to act like a king. So he needs to see what a king should act like. And obviously throughout the two movies, we kind of see Theoden acting as a king in some regard, but then in a few other places he kind of falls short. And Aragorn, I think, can see that.
Well, he's recognising.
Aragorn does fall short as well in this film. And so it's like he is kind of emulating the character of Theoden. Where he is kind of quick to anger, or maybe quick to aggression or whatever.
Yeah.
And he realizes that those aren't necessarily kingly traits.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I couldn't have put it better myself, mate. 100%. Yeah, and it's a fantastic scene, that, because he stops him from killing Wormtongue, and Wormtongue skulks off. And he spits on Aragorn's hand, even though he just saved him. I just thought that was pretty grim.
Well, yeah. Again, I suppose it's if you cast your own ideal into hell, or you spit on your own ideal, like, where are you? You're gonna be in hell. And obviously it goes back to Orthanc, which has basically become hell.
Yeah, mate. Yeah.
Fires and pits everywhere. So.
Yeah, with the burning trees and burning
basically
the world
everywhere. And,
yes.
And obviously then Aragorn, recognizing the status that Theoden has and respecting that, he then shouts, "Hail, Theoden King!" And
to sort of break the dream, the hell state, or something along those lines. But
it's reminding. I suppose trying to remind Theoden that he's still supposed to be someone to look up to.
Yes, exactly. I'm just going to quickly pause it there so I can pop to the loo.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll do the same. Same.
So pause the podcast there, and I'll be back in a second.
Cool. 2 seconds.
And we're back. Here we go. So, Rohan restored. A message of death I've got written down here. What do you think I mean by that, Ollie?
I'm trying to remember what that would be. So where are we at the moment?
So we've had the king basically restored to the throne. We've got everything back to normal in the basically the capital of Rohan, but Theoden has forgotten something. Well, not necessarily forgotten something, but not realised what's happened around him.
Oh, he does. I suppose he doesn't. He hasn't yet realised that his son is dead.
Exactly.
So his kingdom is effectively dead because it was
Exact.
nothing
Oh,
to
mate. Yeah,
yeah.
spot on. Yeah, and it's not just the fact that his son's died is the main thing, but also his kingdom's burning around him because his son's died as well. And it's the metaphorical side of things, but also the physical like burning of his kingdom. And I think he's starting to realise that when he has to bury his son.
Yeah, where him and Gandalf have that little conversation, don't they? When he finds out his son is dead. Or is it after the burial? It might be after the burial, actually.
Yes.
And Gandalf is like, obviously there's stuff to do.
Yes.
But Gandalf has to use a bit of tact because there's a limited amount of time, but he also needs to actually let Theoden grieve properly.
Yes.
And so he sort of gives him words of comfort, saying his spirit he was strong in life, and his spirit will find its way to the halls of your fathers, which I think is a beautiful.
It is.
That would be a beautiful thing to hear. I think it's certainly if that was your mythology, so to speak, if you believe that was where you go after you died.
Yeah.
It's like your son was actually worthy of Valhalla, so to speak. So he's going to spend eternity in the golden halls of whatever Edoras, whatever heaven Edoras has. And it's like, he was actually worthy of being there. So,
yeah, and it's on top of that, it's the ability for Gandalf to speak and not offend Theoden at like this point of pure weakness, because you see him like he's about to break down, he's about to like true emotion, because he's been in basically limbo this entire time.
Yeah.
So as we've talked before about this is like his rush of realization, his just oh my god, what is going on?
He's smacked in the face of reality, hasn't
he? Yeah, and it's it's not about to get any better anytime soon. We're for Theoden it's a tough time to come. So we've got.
But he actually cries as well, and it's like
he does.
It's
yeah,
a manly thing to kind of do. It's like, and Gandalf obviously isn't saying like, come on, get yourself together, be a man about it, and like just tough it out. It's like, no, you actually, I understand, you actually do need to grieve here. So I'm gonna say what I need to say. Hopefully it's of some kind of comfort, and then I'm going to leave you to your grieving because.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
I don't know about you. But I prefer to grieve alone. It's like when something is going on, like you just need to let it happen.
Yeah. On top of that, the fact that he says no father should have to bury their child, it's like that really hits home. Like you think about that. Like if you had your son and they died before you, it's just like the ultimate failure in sort of life, really.
Yeah,
especially in that sort of age group.
The most unfair life could really get, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
The young die before the old.
Yeah, and so Gandalf being there, like Gandalf is a super being almost, isn't he? He is. We've addressed this before. So having Gandalf by his side, it's not really like having another sort of man or someone else. So he is really alone technically. It's almost like having a more spiritual being or a sage of some sort next to you during this grieving period. So
I'm not sure the race of men know that the wizards are actually gods.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, he's more like.
It doesn't matter too much because obviously they still know that there is kind of magic in Middle Earth that they can kind of tap into. So, yeah.
There is that, and Gandalf's words are. Well, they're more. We've said this. They're articulate, aren't they? But they're also to men. They start to realise that he's just not a normal man. So there is some sort of recognition there that he might be something more than he says he is. And this all leads on to this beautiful scene. This leads on to the boy and the little girl who are on the horse, and they're riding toward Edoras, aren't they? And this is like the match that lights the fire to everybody in Rohan leaving for Helm's Deep, because he falls off the horse and it's like the falling of Rohan. Like this is it. Like this is the sick.
Yeah, because they're horse masters, aren't they?
Exactly. So it's it was really interesting the next scene because we see confrontation between Aragorn and Theoden, and it brings back to what you said earlier about sort of
about
Theoden trying to be the ideal towards Aragorn. Do you think that would be?
And I think because Theoden is kind of quick to anger, it kind of makes Aragorn quick to anger because he's trying to emulate the character of the king, you know.
It feels that, doesn't it? Because Gimli puts in that little sly sort of edge towards, because you can see the reaction on his face when Aragorn sort of gives him, I wouldn't say tact, but a sort of, you're in an open war whether you like it or not, basically. It's sort of like, whoa, you've just addressed a king like that. Like, what do you think you're doing?
Not too much respect there, is there? Almost.
No. It's not like Theoden deserves it though, because he's clearly being defensive and very sort of. I think because he himself feels like he's been sort of taken by the darkness, he thinks that the rest of his kingdom could be easily taken away from him just within seconds, and so he goes into this sort of defensive mode, doesn't he?
Yeah, and it could also be that because he knows he's been absent for a long time, he knows that he needs to. It's not that he needs to exert his rule, so to speak, or like solidify his power through everybody. It's just that he needs to act quickly, and like he's just been asleep, for however many months or years, and it's like all of a sudden he's been bombarded with all this information. He's got to somehow try and act on it. And so the only thing he can really think to do, aside from being a bit hot-headed, but the only thing he can really think to do is say, right, well, we have to do what we've done before, and that's go to Helm's Deep, and we'll defend ourselves there.
The easiest way to sort of address the problem is to repeat a previous solution, almost.
Yeah, exactly. And then obviously Gimli says that, it's no rabble of mindless orcs.
Yes.
Sticking the shields abroad. And it's like, mate, I'm a king. I've fought this before. Can you butt out, please? I suppose what he's trying to do is he's trying to show or prove to his men that he's still in charge.
Yes.
I think that's what he's trying to do.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there as well, because he goes on to say, my men, do you not see them? They stare. They're on a thread, basically.
When they're in Helm's Deep, he says that, and it's like he obviously knows that it kind of is over for them, but he wants to kind of give them as much hope and as much courage as he possibly can.
Which is part of the ideal that Aragorn goes on to hold tightly the most, I think, is hope. Because hope is the thing that Aragorn sort of embodies later on in the Return of the King, and when he gives his speech at the Black Gate. It's very similar in the sense that he realizes that this might be the end, but it shall be such an end that will be remembered for all time.
There's a couple of lines in 300, the film, when I think Michael Fassbender's character, whatever his name is, he's talking to one of the Athenians, and he's basically saying that I think they're looking out upon the Persian army from the cliffs, and he's saying, I hope that somewhere in there is a warrior that is worthy of giving me a glorious death, and that is, as a Spartan's death, that is to die in battle.
Yes.
So it's to find an opponent that is
truly worthy.
Yeah, and like genuinely worthy of a fight.
Yes.
Because obviously the only fight that's really worth having is one that you would that you're going to lose.
Yes, exactly.
Because then maybe you bounce back from it or whatever. And so I suppose that's kind of what they're doing there. It's like we are going to go out, and it is going to be glorious, and they're going to speak. They're going to tell stories, and they're going to make songs, and they're going to party about it. They're going to reminisce for hundreds of years to come, and hopefully we will be worthy of going to our version of heaven, which obviously is
it's very Viking-esque, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very similar to the idea of Valhalla. It's like the halls of your ancestors. Yeah.
You have to fight to get there. You have to earn your way to get into heaven. It's very interesting.
You have to die in battle. You
Yeah.
can't die of old age.
No, yeah, it is a
Yeah,
beautiful idea, isn't it? In the sense of
yeah,
addressing war in a more, what's the word? Less grotesque and more meaningful in the sense
yeah,
of using war in a less violence and more meaning to why you're creating the violence in the first place.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, definitely.
so back to the message of death. I've got the very next scene is sort of Wormtongue returns to Orthanc, like you said, and he basically informs Saruman that Aragorn wears the ring of Barahir, which is the equivalent of Bet telling them that he is the Isildur's heir.
Yeah.
And Saruman's like, aha, this is Gandalf's plan. And he then shows Wormtongue, like, but my master, there is no such army. And then he shows like this insane, like, sort of like army of 10,000 Uruk-hai that he's forged within um, the sort of catacombs of Orthanc. My thoughts there is
Yeah,
like,
in like the
how
pits
do you
of hell.
sustain that?
What do you mean physically? Like what the
Yeah,
logistics
like
behind
how
it
would
is?
you sustain an army of that size? Like that's insane.
I, I don't know. I mean, a lot of lembas bread, I'm sure. A lot of Elvish way bread.
Mate,
No,
that's
I don't know. I
true.
mean, I've often thought of that. Like it's like going back to the film 300. I've often thought like, how would an army of that size, how would it be fed every single day, round the clock?
Yeah.
Like it must be a logistical nightmare to be.
Well,
Like,
they
you
talked
think,
about that,
like,
didn't they? They said
how
back in
many?
the day that
Yeah,
was
like
what failed and won armies.
yeah, they did. Yeah. And like you imagine like how many? Let's just say a human being that is going to war needs 2,000 calories a day. Maybe they
Yes.
get it in just the one meal. Well, how many warriors? How many how many animals have to be slaughtered, and how many bits of bread have to be made to feed a million soldiers? Like it would be
Yeah.
absolutely it'd just be impossible.
You'd be having a
So
war in
it
just
might
by
be they
getting the
had to,
army fed in the first place.
exactly, yeah, they just mutiny, wouldn't they, after a while?
Yeah, man.
I don't know. I
100%.
mean, yeah, it's a funny point actually.
It
But
is.
no, I
And
mean that scene, I really like that scene.
mm,
I forget if that's the one when they give them the speech about going to war.
I think it's the next one on. So it's like, I think this one's the one where he's just about to release the Warg Riders, and later on in the
Oh,
film,
that's
he
it.
gives
Yeah,
the
yeah,
massive speech where he says "To war."
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we'll get to that speech
Yes.
at some point, I'm sure. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because it's
so I
fantastic, like you say.
like when he says, "For my lord, there is no such army," and then you hear the
Yes.
horn,
Yes.
and then Grima's got this candle
Yeah,
which
it
goes
gets
out
blown out.
when he goes outside, which I really liked. I thought that was really good. But
I
even
totally agree.
Grima Wormtongue, he's like he's looking down, he's thinking like, well, I don't know, maybe not, but I mean, you certainly would probably question like, what have I done? Because
Yeah,
this is partly me.
what have I sided with?
Yeah, exactly. Like is this like you're looking down at this bloodthirsty group of what you could effectively call demons? It's like, are they really on the side of the good? Like,
Yeah,
is any good going
exactly.
to come of this?
Well, his greed has overtaken him. I think at that point he's just fully realised where he's sort of sided with, like you said, and he's got a,
Yeah.
what's the phrase? You've got to sort of deal with the issue that you've addressed.
You got to lay in the bed you made.
That's it. That's it. Thank you. Somebody do it.
Yeah.
So the Warg Riders
And certainly,
are the next bit,
certainly as
aren't they?
we're that's kind of second. But certainly as we're kind of learning about the Ring of Barahir and stuff, and it's a good little ring actually because it's serpents, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. The
And serpents and
infinity serpent.
Yeah, like the Ouroboros, one serpent devouring and one serpent. What's the other one doing?
Yeah, it's one serpent devouring the other serpent's tail, isn't it? It's in infinity is like a circle of 8, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the Ouroboros, but in the actual Ring of Barahir, I think they designed. I can't think now, but But yeah, it's like the one has a golden crown, and the other one is being drowned by the flower. And it's like that. I suppose it's sort of it's like the last symbolic, the last symbolic remnant of a kingly character. You know, because obviously the serpent in mythological terms, in psychoanalytic terms, the serpent kind of represents the unconscious. It represents the shadow. And so, for a king to be a real king, he would have to assimilate to the shadow, because he would need to be a hero in the mythological sense of the word. And so, obviously, if you sort of carrying that ring, it kind of means that you've assimilated your shadow. And so, if you are a good king, you're not going to be evil, because you know evil.
And therefore not becoming the Shadow King.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's what Robert Mueller would put it.
That's an interesting concept. I didn't think about that, to be honest. Nice. I didn't know that about the Ring of Barrowhead, to be fair. I looked it up and looked at the imagery and thought, that's all there is to it. It's just merely the Infinity Ring. No, there's much more to it than I actually thought. Damn. There you go. Definitely. That's why you're here, Ollie. You got to bring the details in. But you know, on a lighter, I don't want to skip this scene. But the thing is, there's not a lot to really get into. You've got the road to Faramir. That is the scene where you've got Frodo and Sam and Smeagol, and obviously the biggest meme of all time is like, taters. What do you do with taters? Like, boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew. There's obviously the typical sort of Lord of the Rings.
I do love some potatoes, man.
Yeah, true. Chips.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely like scene, because obviously Smeagol's trying to basically address Frodo as his master and realizing that, you know, there's more to life than
Frodo's now. Yeah, and Frodo's now his ideal, isn't he?
Yes, because he has that conversation with himself, doesn't he?
Exactly, yeah, and Gollum is effectively absent. Gollum has been chased away, so to speak. And you know, Sam is obviously still mistrusting.
Yes.
So he's not necessarily too careful with his words, but I think he's sort of at least not being nasty. Although I think we have skipped a scene, because there is when Smeagol is trying to catch a fish in the ice water.
That's it.
And he says, "Hey, stinker, don't go wandering off."
Yeah. Why do you call them names? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like him and Frodo have a bit of an argument and stuff. And I think Sam, he did kind of take that into account, because he doesn't call him that again.
No, he doesn't. And later on we'll get into it later on in the film, but there's a whole scene where actually, like, Sam's really nice to Smeagol.
Yeah. He actually apologizes.
Yeah, he does. And it's really interesting, because Frodo, we start to see the serious effects of the ring on Frodo when he has these little like outbursts, doesn't he? And it's really...
Yeah, it's like the shadow is kind of taking its toll.
Yeah.
The exploration of it is taking its toll.
Yeah, exactly. It's really fascinating, isn't it? In that sense, one or another. And that scene where they're going on, they have.
They seal the Harrod Rim, don't they?
That's it. That's it. And
Mumkill, I think they're called.
Yeah. He says elephant, doesn't he? He's like,
Oliphants, yeah.
Yeah, which is so funny that they just put an O at the front of elephant and just thought, that'll do. You know. Yeah, don't want it too different.
It's another sort of reference to nature, I suppose, isn't it? But it's like an elephant in the wild. Yes. Although they do occasionally get drunk on rotten fruit and then rampage through towns, like they're mostly animals.
They are.
Not really. They are aggressive, obviously, when there's a threat, but most animals are. And they're obviously big enough to kind of handle most things anyway. But it's like the in this story, the Oliphants have been evil men.
Yes. Yeah. They've been sort of persuaded to join the dark side, haven't they?
Yeah, or they've been forced to. They haven't really got a choice about it. So, yeah.
It's always the way, isn't it, where animals get put into terrible situations by not necessarily being evil themselves, but by being sort of pushed by evil.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of things happen in like Thailand and stuff where they to get the animal to perform in a circus, when it's born, they have to basically break its spirit, and they do that I think by chaining it up and beating it.
I
And it's like
didn't
it's
know
horrible.
that, to be fair.
Yeah, it's horrible, and that's why they've done those elephant sanctuaries and stuff. And there's some there is a photo. Trying to remember the context of it. Basically, an elephant has been in captivity and treated horrendously and starved for its entire life, basically. And it basically breaks and it goes on a rampage against its masters. And it's one of those weird photos that really captures, I suppose you could call it desperation in the face of an animal. Like it has an expression on its face that it is of sheer desperation. And then apparently they killed it. So it was a pretty sad existence for that particular elephant, and I'm sure it's not the only one. But anyway,
Very similar to the Oliphant in the sense that the only thing it can look forward to is the end of the battle, basically.
yeah, basically, and it's going to have spears and arrows shot at it, and like
Yes.
it's not an evil being itself, is it?
No.
It's being controlled. So yeah, corrupted nature, something like that.
Very relevant in this case, where we see a lot of corrupted beings, not necessarily, being evil in the first place, but slowly but surely being, brings back to that sort of idea of like, if I push you back a little bit and you say okay, and then I push you back a little bit further, and then you allow me to push you until you finally get there.
It's ordinary men, isn't it?
Terrible, isn't it? In the sense that you can see that happening every now and then in the real world.
But there is a moment in that particular scene which I really like, when I'm going to see if I can find a transcript, because it's actually brilliant. It's basically when the Rangers attack, and Faramir shoots and kills one of the Haradrim soldiers, and it falls and lands in front of Frodo and Sam.
Yes.
And I'm going to see if I can very quickly find the quote, because it's very, very good. And it basically introduces Faramir, and it kind of tells you the kind of man he is. This is it. Found that thing. So
I do remember the quote where he says, "It's time for Captain Faramir to show his true, true worth or true nature." It gets said quite a lot throughout the film, which is very interesting to see how you meet him in the beginning of the film and how he's very different by the end of it. It's almost like what we wanted to see with Boromir, but you don't necessarily have that speed that is shown in the Fellowship, because it's a lot slower, sort of.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because it's a slow build up, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is so he, when he's looking at the body of the man who's just killed,
yeah,
he says, I think actually this is his quote from the book, not the film, but it is pretty much the same thing. It says he wondered what the man's name and where he came from, and if he was really evil at heart, or what lies and threats had led him on a long march from his home, and if he would not really have rather stayed there in peace. And it's like
yes.
he kind of knows that men, generally speaking, they're not pure evil or pure good. They're a mix, and it's like this young lad that's just been murdered, just been killed in the name of war. He was actually somebody. It wasn't just a faceless, nameless stormtrooper.
Which it does feel like, doesn't it, in the War of the Ring, is that you've got orcs and Uruk-hai and goblins, and they're very easy to sort of dismiss as baddies, aren't they? They're born and bred to be evil.
And you can physically see that they're bad.
Yes, but with men like the Haradrim, they are corrupted, not evil at heart. So yeah, that's a really nice quote to sort of bring in to question whether Faramir himself has questioned himself, and it's actually super relevant seeing what happens to his brother,
definitely.
in how we see he was corrupted. So I'm glad you brought that up. That is intriguing, because I forgot about that.
It's that little line he says. What you wonder, not the rest of it, but you wonder whether he really was evil at heart. That's played on my mind for probably 10 years.
Mm.
I would say since when I saw the films, how long ago? 10 years ago.
Yeah.
After rewatching them, I don't know how many hundreds of times now.
Yeah.
But it was one of the ones that stuck out.
It
Was like whenever
totally understand,
I try and just imagine, people throughout our own history, throughout human history, like, were they really evil, or were they just doing what they believed to be right, or were they tricked or duped, or did they just get caught up in the storm?
It's always the question. There is no true. I remember writing an essay on I think it was like, was Truman truly? I forgot the word, where you do something truly good. Basically, you do something without any unquestionable good.
Altruistic.
Altruistic. Thank you. Was Truman truly altruistic? And I think you can't.
The ex-president.
Yeah, the ex-president. Yeah, basically wrote an entire essay on that. And it does bring into your mind, there are no truly evil, there are no truly good. And it's also bringing up, that's a Harry Potter quote I've just brought up there accidentally. Because like Voldemort, who is evil, and you can like put that to his name because of what he's performed, is like, he says, there is no good, there is no evil, there is only power. And it's very intriguing, because I think it's the men who seek power who fall into darkness, and it's those who understand that power is there but don't choose to wield it that go into the light, but aren't necessarily truly light, because obviously there's Aragorn, Theoden, they all have their sort of downsides as well as upsides.
Yeah, maybe the pursuit of power without the knowledge of the capacity for one's own evil is what brings men down.
Yeah.
But maybe because I don't know. I mean, I thought about this a lot. Like, why would anyone bother going into politics? Why would you bother standing to be a minister for Parliament, for example, in the UK? And it's like, well, one argument is that it's about personal power, like you want to be representative of something. The other argument is that you think you can do some good, and I think both of those things are incredibly dangerous, because you don't know how. If you think you can only do good, you clearly don't know how much bad you could do.
Yes.
And that could be a real problem, So, yeah.
Yeah, you've got to truly understand bad before you can do any good, anyway.
Yeah.
Don't
because
do that.
You need to know what to move away from.
Yes. Exactly.
You might not know what's good. So
Yeah.
You need to know where you don't want to be. And move away from.
That's definitely answered, I think, our question on whether people are truly evil at heart, and whether Faramir looked at him and thought, is he truly evil? I think that definitely has brought to mind that I think Tolkien did bring that as a question. I think that the fact that he wrote these books to represent World War One or World War Two, I can't remember which at the time. I think it was World War One.
He was in World War One, yeah.
Yeah, I think more in World War One than in World War Two is that in World War One the Germans were just fighting on behalf of a king, and so it was much easier to question whether they were good or bad, not necessarily bad or good at the same time. So I do like that that's been put into the movie, and that's there as a question for the audience to really ponder throughout or later on.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next bit, which is a little bit more lighthearted, not so in depth, but it's obviously the scene where they're moving from Edoras to Helm's Deep. This is the long road to Helm's Deep, basically, and you've got Gimli as a bit of a comic relief, where he tells that dwarfs just spring out of holes, and that there may not be dwarf women. He's that they're mistaken for dwarf men because of the beards.
Yeah.
And we find out that Aragorn is 87 years old because he's a Dunedain.
He looks good. He looks good for his age, doesn't he?
Mate, if you look that good at 87, you've been doing something right. It's either the steroids or it's some sort of aging cream.
Just fish oil, mate. That's all it is.
Just creatine, bud. It's just good creatine. Visions of Arwen. That's what I was going to ask you about. So he gets asked about the necklace that he carries around his neck by Eowyn. and we get these visions of Aaron. I was going to ask you, why do you think? Because Aragorn's not asleep, but he sees them while he's walking. Why do you think that's brought up in the film?
Well, so it's an anima figure. Normally, the anima animus appears in times of great psychological distress. I actually have something in my phone, not specifically about Lord of the Rings, but about the anima. And I think basically because Aragorn is kind of seeing the king in front of him.
Yes.
But he's torn about emulating the character because it doesn't seem to him to be truly kingly, so to speak. Although obviously Theoden is a good king, he's been raised by good people. He's not. Theoden is actually not sure of it himself. There is a line in Return of the King, which obviously we'll get to in the next podcast, where Saruman is talking to Theoden, and he says, "You are a lesser son of greater sires." And it's like that would hit you, wouldn't it?
It's pretty savage. It's pretty savage.
Yeah, and it's I suppose it's like maybe Theoden, because Eowyn says to Aragorn, Theoden says he remembers Aragorn riding to war with her grandfather Thengri. Maybe Theoden never had. I don't know, because he doesn't actually say that he fought many wars. But I don't know. Maybe he never had his kinghood, his kingship tested, and so it never, like the aspect of his personality, never developed properly. Or maybe his father died when he was very young, and so he didn't have that ideal that he should have emulated. And so it's like he's really conflicted about how to be a king, despite the fact that he actually is a king. So he has to make
That's a very good point. It would make sense as well, because it would tie nicely with the fact that his son died, and therefore his father died, so he's had both sides. He's had both a son die and a father die early on, which would make sense. And it would
that actually would make sense, because it would also mean that he would have no idea how to be a father to his own son.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So going back to Aragorn, so he's seeing a king in front of him who's not acting in the way that he believes a king should act, and so, but at the same time, he knows that he's in the land of this king, and Aragorn isn't the king himself, and so he has to worship the king as such. And so, I suppose he's torn between not really wanting to, because he doesn't think he deserves it fully, and just kind of going along with the culture, I suppose.
Yes.
So I have, and so that little battle inside his head is causing him to be distressed. So that then an anima appears. So here's what I've got about an anima. Excuse me. So anima or animus, oriented inward, acting as a barrier or door between the ego and the unconscious, usually encountered during times of psychic disorientation in a dream, often a member of the opposite sex, offering guidance to remove psychological barriers hindering natural progression, typically preceding significant personality transformations.
That makes a lot of sense.
In this context, certainly does.
Yeah.
And then integration of the anima into one's ego allows for access to the self, which is the deepest layer of the psyche. And so that's all I've got on that. But if you imagine Aragorn is trying to access the king energy, as Robert Moore might have said, and he can't see it in Theoden, so he's got to look into it, because he can only really try and see it himself. So yeah, I think that's.
It makes sense, because he's gaining guidance from his love, and I think, doesn't she say, "Let it be a good dream"? And it's almost like that reassurance on his mind that he is heading down the right path. And
obviously she's a figure from, as we were saying before, like this religious aspect of Middle-earth that remembers the beginning, and so they remember what it, I suppose, being pure, so to speak. So you can imagine that maybe the race of elves, although obviously the detail in the stories that you have about them are different, but you can imagine the race of elves, because they have this kind of pseudo religion, they are all worthy of the title of king, if you get me.
I do see what you mean. Yeah, they have the ability to connect with that king. It's probably why Legolas has that sort of such a tight bond with a king.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so I think that's what it is, and obviously later on in um, on the road from Edoras to Helm's Deep, they obviously get attacked, and then Aragorn does die in a sense.
Yes, yeah. So it ties in nicely, doesn't it?
Excuse me. Yeah, it does, and obviously he encounters the animal once again, and it's like, obviously in times of psychic distress, the typical. This may be wrong, but my typical mode of action, if I was distressed in some way, my typical mode of action would be whatever the distress is, I need to submit to it, and that will allow me to peacefully die and then be reborn, psychologically speaking.
Yes.
Something new. And then hopefully that something new will work in whatever way it's supposed to work. And that actually does happen to Aragorn, because the next time we see him after the battle, he's walking through the doors into the king's chamber.
Yes.
Sounding the alarm. And I suppose actually it's like he's all of the. You know what I was saying earlier about the eye of Horus? Like the ability to pay attention and see what's coming.
Yeah.
Well, Aragorn can now see what's coming.
Yes, he does.
He's now a king, so to speak.
It's yeah, exactly that, mate. I think because he's able to see, he tells Theoden, like, there's tens of thousands. He's able to identify the enemy, identify the evil that's coming to Helm's Deep. And there's this nice little sort of, I think it's Wormtongue who describes Helm's Deep. He's like, it's made of stone and brick. There's only one place there's a weakness. So this is perfect, isn't it, in this sort of story, that there's one weakness within this sort of fortress of stone, and that Theoden has not led them into a, you'd think it wouldn't be a trap, but it is.
Yeah.
And that Aragorn's the only one who can basically tell him, you have led them into a trap. This is a trap. Like, look, this is the truth.
Yeah.
But it's intriguing, isn't it, that he fell into the unconscious and manages to return through the love of Arwen and through that.
And it was water again, wasn't it?
It was, yes, exactly. Transformation.
Water, the unconscious. And it was a horse. It was nature that kind of woke him back up.
Yeah, Brago. Yeah. And the horse in itself is a horse of nature, because he takes the reins off the horse and sets it free before.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. And the horse was kind of insane, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah. It was a rogue horse. So it was the prince's horse, believe it or not. So. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it makes sense, doesn't it? It's like this sort of kingly ship. It can sense the king.
Yeah.
That is Aragorn.
It can sense the king energy.
Yes. Yeah. So I love that we've brought that. That's so seamlessly nice there, because it's brought on to from that vision we see Arwen's destiny, basically, and we go to Rivendell, where she's sort of saying to her father that, look, I want to stay here for Aragorn's sake. And then Elrond sort of describes this sort of grey, never-ending life. And it's you've brought up the elves' religion a lot, and it is almost like their ability to know and their ability to sort of understand the future and see. But why do you think Elrond, apart from being a father, brings up this never-ending life so much to Arwen and wants her to be with her people?
Well, I mean, it's only a never-ending life if she goes to the Undying Lands.
Yes.
If she leaves Middle-earth. But I do like what he says, that like, if you marry Aragorn, whether by a sword or a slow decay of time, that Aragorn will die.
Yeah.
You will be left with all your grief to wander the long years of the world or something like that. And I think he's kind of because it seems like in that instance she hasn't given up her immortality, which she would have to do. Or maybe not. I think he's trying to scare her into surviving, because not only does it mean that if she stays behind, not only does it mean for Elrond that his daughter is going to die one day, and obviously kind of goes back to what Theoden was saying, that no parent should ever bury their child.
Yes.
it basically means that she will also be exposed to the grief and the perils of the world and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Which is a nice sort of metaphor there, because after you have this sort of vision of darkness, we see a sea of darkness, which is the army of the Uruk-hai.
Yeah.
So we have this vision for Arwen where we're like, oh my god, there's like by sword or by eventual death through time, Arwen there's no win-win here. Elrond's saying like you're going to find darkness either way.
That's it. It's like the curse of mortality is that you will die one day.
Exactly.
But then at the same time, I mean, Elrond should know. I mean, it's obviously not my place to put, to correct him. He should know that the gift that Eru gave to men is that they could die.
Yes.
And that was actually part of their is intrinsically part of their being, is that they were allowed to leave the earth basically, and not live in it forever as the elves do. Because obviously the elves don't suffer really. They can die from heartbreak, and they die in war, but they don't die of anything else.
Yes.
But obviously men are vulnerable to pretty much everything, down from small insects to big large rocks. You know what I mean?
But that's the point, isn't it? It's the value of life that truly makes man the sort brevity, of pinnacle of the Middle Earth.
Yeah.
So from there, this again, you've described the flaws and the sort of brightness of man there, which leads on to a scene that you've talked about in the previous podcast, which we finally get to talk about now, is Boromir's fate, and also a vision that Faramir sees in the cave. So we get the cutscene, and we go from the Sea of Darkness that Aragorn sees of the Uruk-hai, but then we go to the cave of where Frodo and Sam have been taken. And basically we are informed that Boromir's been killed. We know this, but Frodo and Sam don't.
Yeah.
And we get a vision from Faramir's perspective of what Boromir was in Minas Tirith. I want to hear your comments on this, because we've been building up to this in previous podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear to see that from the cutscenes of Boromir. It's when they reclaim Osgiliath, isn't it?
Yes.
Never again will this city fall. It'll be a place of music and beauty.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very good. It's not like an economist talking. It's like, we'll have some shops and we'll have some tradesmen everywhere. It's like, no, we'll make some beautiful things here.
Yes.
Which I thought was really nice. And then
it goes to a lot of without beauty, how are you meant to identify darkness? And also, like, beauty is what we live for in life. So that's spot on from Boromir.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn said in the Gulag excuse me, I'm trying to say that again.
Yeah.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn said in the Gulag Archipelago that beauty would save the world.
Yes.
And I really like that idea, because it's like man does not live by bread alone. Like, you don't live by physical sustenance alone. It's not enough to just have a job and just survive. Like that isn't it. Like, there has to be something else.
Yes.
And I would say that certainly most creative types, they live for beauty.
Yes.
And I think it might be something that the rest of humanity should look at, is to see the beauty that lies in front of them, whether they can see it or not.
We articulate it through reading, writing, and love, and art, and paintings, and through movies.
Yeah, definitely through movies. Yeah, definitely. That for me, that's my part of my goal. I suppose you call it goal. And the ongoing process, one of the ongoing processes I'm trying to go through in my life, is to notice the things that I value, and those things I keep coming back to. And for me, one of those is films, and it is a good story, and that's why where I am at the moment, I've got a little home theatre set up, and obviously you saw the one I had in my flat in North Shields. It's like
top dollar. Wow.
It was good, wasn't it? That entire wall at a 160-inch screen. That was
couldn't have got any better, Pad.
No, I mean, literally, it genuinely was, divine in some sense. The experiences I had, just watching, the Marvel films, like they were
Yeah,
so fantastically well done. And yeah, and for me, that's something. Is that there's real beauty in the storytelling, um, and the home cinema obviously amplifies the beauty.
I totally
But
agree.
I've
Yeah.
realised, because I hadn't watched any films for, I don't know, 2 months,
Mm,
and I watched one. I actually watched Baby Driver about
brilliant.
3 weeks ago. Watched it on a projector with headphones in, so it's kind of like surround sound stuff. And it was just, for an hour and a half. It was genuinely beautiful. I really really enjoyed it. And so I've realised that one of the things I will have to do one day, when I have my own place, when I have my own house and stuff, I will have to have a home cinema,
Yeah.
because I actually value it. You know what I mean? It's like, and obviously not the necessarily the details, like the actual home cinema. Like, that's just me kind of being greedy in a sense. But it's the storytelling, it's the immersion in the dream. So that's
Yes.
why I
But
value
it's prioritization, isn't it, as well? It's like we both value this. And you, like Boromir says within the story, it's like it will be filled with these beautiful things
it.
because
Yeah,
they value the beauty and they value
yeah,
the vision and they value the story. And it's like that is sustenance. That is what we live for. Because to survive purely for the sort of hunter gatherer that we are biologically programmed to be is
yeah.
not enough anymore.
Definitely not, because we've kind of risen above it in a sense. Our
Yes,
consciousness has expanded. We can see above what we need to survive, and we can see more now. So I
yeah,
suppose it goes back to sight again, doesn't it? There
it
was,
does. Yeah, always goes back to sight, articulating the world around you and really
yeah,
understanding what's valuable and what you see. And if Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was in the Gulag and articulated
yeah,
the worst part of the world, thinks that
yeah,
beauty is the best, but it is the thing that's going to rise humanity from the pits, you probably should listen because
yeah.
the gulags are probably the worst place on earth ever to be created for anyone.
Definitely, definitely. I think Viktor Frankl had similar ideas, in Man's Search for Meaning.
Mm,
And obviously, you imagine that Viktor Frankl was in Auschwitz,
yes,
and obviously, yeah, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was in the gulags in Soviet Russia. And it's like, aside from like genuine torture, you probably couldn't find a worse hell on earth, like
yes,
a genuine, literal hell on earth.
yes.
You probably couldn't find it anywhere else.
I
I'm
just
sure you
remind
could.
myself of the killing fields in Cambodia. That's
Yeah.
the only other
Again,
place I can think of.
another hell on earth.
Yes,
Yeah.
only other place.
Um,
That's it. Everywhere else seems pretty nice compared to that.
well, I mean, there's been a lot. There's been a lot of other things. Obviously, communist China. You know,
Yes,
the estimates range upwards of 100 million
yeah.
people
We
died
have no idea how bad it got out there. I don't think we'll know until there's a de-assembling of the communist state. But
Well,
who
I
knows when
doubt
that
very
will
much
be?
we'll ever know, because I would imagine that any documented history would be false anyway. So,
Very true. Very
um,
true. Um,
but anyway,
anyway,
where were we?
back to Boromir and
So
I quote you in saying his ability to put beauty into the streets of Osgiliath.
yeah, and so he's got this, crowd of men around him, and they're all looking up to him. And obviously, he's got the Gondorian flag as well. And so it's
Yes.
like he's wearing the Gondorian armor, got a sword out. He's a handsome guy. He's built. He's a good warrior, and he's speaking. What would you call it? Motivational words, I suppose you could say. And it's like they're all looking up at everything it means to be a Gondorian man, a man of Gondor. Um, yeah, man of ministry. I think there's probably another word for it. A man of
A captain, a true captain, a leader of men.
captain of Gondor. Yeah, leader of men. He's like he is a great man through and through. He
Mm.
genuinely is a great man. And obviously, and I said this in the last podcast, and I'll probably say it in the next one.
Yeah.
When Denethor asks Pippin, how could a man mighty as he die, defending you? Pippin says, the mightiest man may be felled by one arrow. And Boromir was pierced by many.
Yeah.
And it's like it just confirms that whatever whatever people thought of him, he genuinely was that.
Yeah.
And so obviously Faramir is looking up at him, and it's an ideal, right?
Yep. That's what I've got written down here as well.
And so in Faramir's vision, he sees his dead ideal again in the water, floating along the water, and it's actually the water is actually inside the boat as well. So Boromir's body is floating, he's submerged in water.
Yes.
And so it's like, well, again, if your ideal is dead, where are you? And the answer can only really be hell.
Yes.
In the books, I think it's different. I think it's that they still see the body, and they see the horn of Gondor clothing in two. But sorry, the mouth is getting dry now. But the Faramir makes the decision basically immediately to let the hobbits go in the books.
Yes.
And so it's not the same in the films. Obviously,
No, the films we shouldn't be going to Osgiliath in the books. But we do. But this is I think this is why the film sort of it leads nicely, because by we seeing that sort of previous vision of Boromir, it's almost like Faramir still believes that Boromir is his ideal, and he then says, like Boromir, he says the ring will go to Gondor, and we end that cutscene there. And it's like it's that decision by seeing that previous vision of how good Boromir was. It's like, I will be like my brother, and the film says like, look, he is like his brother.
Yeah, that's it. And I think he's also trying to please his father.
Yes.
Which is never a good sign. That's like an evil. It's like the tyrannical father. You know, the son always hates the tyrannical father.
Yeah, Denethor's a real dick. Let's be honest. He's just an all-round unlikable character. I can't I wish I could be metaphorically nice about him, but I just don't like him as a character. Like, there's only one character.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I mean, and obviously John Noble plays him absolutely fantastic.
Oh yeah, brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
The one thing you can say is that I don't know. It wasn't really alluded to in the books. In the films. But in the books, Denethor had a Palantir, one of the lost seeing stones.
Yes. I remember that.
Because he was using it, Sauron was poisoning his mind in the same way that Green Wormtongue was poisoning the mind of Theoden.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of see, like, you know, you've got the literal devil whispering in your ear, and he doesn't have a god, because he doesn't have a king. Obviously, he's just a steward.
No ideal again.
Have an ideal.
Yeah.
So he only has the devil, and like you can see how he would slip down, you know, the bad road.
Mate, that's why the greatest quote from Denethor is "Abandon your post, flee for your lives." It's just the best. Like, it's also like the best and the worst part of him. It's like it's just like, oh no, what have you said? But also at the same time. But anyway, that's for the next. That's for the next film. I just wanted to say that nonetheless. So after that, we see all this, and he says the ring will go to Gondor. End of scene. End of that. We then go back to Aragorn returning from being accidentally, you know, he's fallen, but he's, you know, immediately back. So it's a very short death trip, basically.
Well, I mean, if you somewhat voluntarily go into the psyche, then you know you don't have to stay very long, and it doesn't have to do so much damage to you. So, you know.
That's very true. But it does lead into one of my favorite scenes. So we have this sort of build up for the fortification of Helm's Deep, and we have this, like, Theoden's like, every man, boy, child, like, will wield a sword, whatever, you know, something along those lines. And
every man is strong lad.
Yeah, every man is. Thank you. Yes, yeah. And we have this scene between Legolas and Aragorn, where I think it goes back to what you said earlier, where Aragorn's trying to sort of embody Theoden in some way, because he has that conversation with Theoden, doesn't he, before this happens, where they're on the ramparts, and he's like, "What do you want me to do? Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? You know, like, we don't have any sort of men to call for. We are on our own here.
We're not so lucky in our allies as you."
Yes, exactly. And he's feeling alone, and I think he also Aragorn is seeing the fear in Theoden's eyes and is like, I can't let my men or my friends show that fear or sort of darkness to the rest of his men, because he
Yeah,
starts to
it's
realize.
like a kind of show of confidence, isn't it? I suppose it's like regardless of what's going to happen, even though there's no hope, like we're going to give it our best,
Yes.
because that's what we are. We're not just going to sit and cower.
Yeah.
We're going to do the best we can, and if that's it, then so be it. I mean,
Yeah.
that, but
I do
not.
like that about Theoden. He is like, this if this will be an end, it will be such an end sort of thing. Like,
Definitely.
we're gonna go
I
out, and we're
will
gonna
have
go
them
out and
make
starve.
such an end.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to go out with a proper bang.
Yeah. It's a good way. I like it. It's there's
and
something
obviously,
to that.
and obviously to make that happen, Theoden has to actually embody that, and so that's what he's doing. And Aragorn
That's it.
doesn't
Yeah.
realise. Aragorn doesn't realise until Theoden actually says, "Mate, listen to what I'm fucking saying. Like, look at my men, mate. Like,
He's like,
what do you expect me to
he's
do?
like
I mean,
snapping at him. Hey, you,
yeah,
listen.
yeah.
You see these
It's like,
guys around me? They're terrified.
it's like pay attention. Like, come on, come on, mate, Jesus.
Get with the
But
program, man.
yeah, but obviously Legolas doesn't necessarily see that. Maybe doesn't hear the little conversation they have, because they have an
Yes.
argument later on, don't they?
Yes.
And obviously it's in Elvish,
Yes.
and he says, yeah, 300 against 10,000,
Mm.
and Aragorn says they have a better hope of defending themselves here than ahead of us. And then he says, I forget exactly what Legolas says. He basically says we're all going to die.
Yes.
And Aragorn says, yeah, well, I'll die as one of them then.
Yes.
It's
And
like,
he says
I'm
that in
not above
English and
these
not in
people.
Elvish.
Yeah, and it's like I'm not above these people. Like I'm side by side with them. I'm equal to them. I will fight with them. And if I die, then I die, and so be it. And that's how it goes. Um, and I think then Legolas kind of realizes that it's like this is it. Right, this is the answer anyway. Like there's no, we're not running away here. We're not gonna abandon them to the fight so that we can get away, because there's what would be left if we did that. If we ran off, there wouldn't be anything left, and so there wouldn't be much of a world to save anyway. So
Exactly. And they decide that it's better to die fighting than it is to run.
definitely, and obviously, Legolas says that on to Gimli when they're on the wall.
Yes.
Gimli says, "Never thought I'd die side by side with an elf." And Legolas
How about
says,
side
yeah,
by side with a friend?
yeah, and it's like it's beautiful, isn't it? It's like, yeah, all right, I can accept that. I'll take it.
It is the best way to say. Like, I
it.
really enjoyed that, and I thought that was the beginning of Legolas becoming like the likable character. I genuinely thought when he started making jokes like, "Shall I get you a box?" Like, it's just like Gimli's laugh. He's like, ah! just
Yeah.
like the deepest like throat laugh that you've ever heard. It's just like, yes. And it's the beginning of one of my favorite like duos of all time, because they start when the battle begins, they start doing their counting battle, sort of like it's a game, and it's so joyous to watch. It's just so much fun to see them sort of making sport of something that's actually terrifying. Like to most.
It would be, and obviously the only way you could probably make it like kind of bearable is to make a game out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
How many of these demons can I slay before they kill me?
It's 100%. But before we get to that bit, the best part of the film, basically, the battle for Helm's Deep, we have to address the boring part, which is my least favorite part of the film, which is the constant cutscenes between the Ent gathering, basically.
Oh yeah, the Ent moot.
It is, as you've just said there, it is almost like a moot point. It is just like, I've got written down here, a bit boring. That's probably an understatement.
Yeah, it is pretty boring. I mean, it's quite comical, obviously, in a sense. They take how long they take to say good morning.
I forgot about that.
In the book, it is actually called an Ent moot. That is actually what it's called. But yeah, it's. I suppose it's probably like because Merry and Pippin don't have. You could probably make the case that they don't have a very expanded consciousness, and so the parts of them they need to kind of assimilate within themselves. are very old. And
Yes.
they're the parts of them that have been handed to them by evolution. And those parts are basically in a state of what would you call debate.
Mm.
And it's like, should we die? Basically, like, should we die
Yeah.
for this, or should we just try and live because that's what evolution does? Maybe because obviously it's nature, isn't it? It's going back to the whole nature aspect of humanity.
Yes.
Self-preservation. Is it for us to get involved? And obviously the answer they come to is no. And so it's like, oh, well, this is a bit like, well, that's it then. Our part in this story's over, and that's that.
Yeah, exactly.
Work's
And
going to end. Job done.
it's almost like without Pippin's little sort of witty banter to take him past Saruman's fortress.
Yeah.
It's like if that hadn't happened, if the hobbits, the children hadn't used wit and their sharp sort of
Tricked
acute,
themselves.
sight, their ability to see, maybe if we get them to see the truth of the burnt trees, they'll basically switch around. And it is, I think what you said there is that I think it's not just evolution. I think it's like, can you imagine if you're you're a god, right? Time must literally mean less to you than anything else. So like the fact that they said good morning, right, in that amount of time, that probably is fast for them because they're like,
Probably, yeah.
you know what I mean? Like time means nothing to them. Like to the hobbits, time goes fast, but to them, time is an eternity that never ends, sort of thing. It's like,
it's probably morning in a sense to them because they've just woken up from their long sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
How we would say morning to each other. It doesn't really necessarily matter that it's the sun is coming up and it's the time of day. It's the fact that you've just woken up.
Yes.
That could be it. I a couple of years ago, a long time ago, 15 years probably, I had a deck of top trump cards for Lord of the Rings, and I remember on Treebeard was one of the characters in the top trump, and his age was 17,000 years.
Yes.
So that's how old he is. So
17,000 years. Can you imagine that?
Oh, mate. 17,000 years ago, I could be wrong. I believe that's when the Native Americans crossed over the land bridge from Siberia to Alaska.
Jesus.
Or actually, I could be wrong there. That might be when the land bridge was swallowed up by the sea again. So it's a long time ago. But I remember his age because he was the second oldest, and the oldest one was Sauron, and I think his age was like 24,000 years or something like that. So this is a little aside, not really relevant to the story too much, but yeah.
That makes sense as well. That's probably why Sauron's happy with the armies taking forever to form.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Just like, don't worry, lads, we got all the time in the world.
Literally, yeah.
It's just like, but yeah. But yeah, so that leads on to the trees sort of, playing their part. And this is after the Battle of Helm's Deep, so we'll get into that in a second. But so, the best part of the movie, the best battle sequence that I believe of all time, because one of my favourite things about it is that all of the action is practical. Like a lot of it is physically done by actors from New Zealand. And it took them, I think it was like the longest period of filming for the entire film.
Okay.
And
well, it's as I said earlier, it's the longest cinematic battle scene in history. So
yeah,
it's like 1 hour 1 minute in total, like the footage.
Yes. And you got little cutscenes that break it up, but
yeah, exactly.
It's brilliant. And we haven't talked about yet the last alliance, so the arrival of the elves. I think that's quite significant because it was sort of Elrond's decision to still be a part of this world that made him sort of make contact with Galadriel and say, look, this isn't the end for the elves yet. We've still got a part in this world before we leave. And it was rather interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose it's kind of it's like the elves know that there is value in the religion they hold. I'm gonna refer to it as religion just because it's the easiest way of saying it.
100%, because it's really hard to describe the Lord of the Rings sort of what they believe in the background, because it is like so great. There's so much behind it that it's
It's so
you know,
rich.
so rich and so deep that how are you meant to call it anything other than a religion?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I suppose you could call it a pseudo religion, but yeah, religion
Yes.
will serve the purpose, definitely serve the function, which I'm going
Mm.
for. And it's basically Elrond realizes that there is value in it, and that it might be worth giving that value to men. It might be worth showing them that
Yes.
that there is whatever values are present in that religion are worth holding on to.
Yes.
And so it's like, here's 2,000 archers. Hopefully you survive. And that's it. And that's your lot.
So what we got, guys. We're out to start now.
Yeah. And again, it's like the elves are obviously going to. It's not necessarily following blind obedience, but they're all raised on the same values and beliefs and stuff. So they're all there voluntarily. They haven't been ordered to go, under the threat of whips and chains and stuff. It's just my guess is that they they went round Rory and got volunteers. That's effectively what I would imagine happened.
Yes. And
So,
it's nice because it's a nice symbol. It's almost like the same sort of idea between the Last Alliance of Men when they fought against Sauron at the beginning in the first film.
Yeah.
When they were trying to destroy the ring. So it's this nice repetition to show that there's still strength within Middle-earth. And it does go against what Theoden said, we're not as lucky in our friendships as you. Well, case closed, yes you are.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose it's like providing a little bit of hope, and it's like it's saying that there is, as you're saying, there is strength in unity.
Yes.
Against whatever evil is present.
I think that's true outside of this story. I think that's our true strength. I think humanity's ability to unite is the true strength of humanity. So, not to get too deep or anything. But we then have
tried to get very deep with this.
Yes, yeah. No, I'm mucking about, but I think one thing that happens next that isn't like super significant, but I always think of it as is the fact it starts raining. And you might think that's a little bit silly, but it is the worst, like the last sort of possible worst thing that could happen. And then it happens. It's like, okay, there's 10,000 Uruk-hai coming up there. We've got around 2,300 men here. And, it starts raining now. Great.
Yeah. I suppose, again, like symbolically, it's kind of I suppose you could call it the water to the unconscious. It's like it started to rain, like there's a battle within the psyche. Oh, and
yes.
actually, just we need to backtrack because we didn't talk about the speech that Saruman gave.
Oh yes, yeah. Let's address that quickly. Sorry, I totally forgot. Yeah, no, that's my bad.
I do as well. I remember. I'll see if I can actually get the sort of the transcript.
Yeah, get the transcript up. But it is brilliant speech because before that,
it's horrible as well.
Yeah, it's pure evil. It's like because Grimmer Wormtongue is basically asking what sort of fire and mechanism can destroy stone. What sort of madness could basically blow up the Helm's Deep wall? You know, because they're obviously going to plant the bombs into the little gutter. And I think it's like Saruman doesn't directly answer that question, but he does say something along the lines of like, but if we get into the Deeping Wall, it'll be fine. And then Grimmer Wormtongue says, but even if you did have a great amount of men, like you'd need thousands, tens of thousands. And he says, yes. It's just like a simple like, oh yeah, I can get that anywhere I want.
Yeah. I suppose because it could mean you could pretty much get anywhere. But you probably get into the walls of Minas Tirith because that's technically.
Yes. Well, the thing is, that's something that really interests me is that it's a very similar sort of infiltration by both films in one way or another. Except Ministry of feels a little bit more. I think the word dread comes to mind because it doesn't feel like that there's a happy ending because you've got civilians in that city as well.
Yeah. We'll get to that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, we keep addressing little things, but it's nice because it sort of provokes.
Yeah, but it's kind of like foreshadowing, I suppose, isn't it? Or
Yes.
it's like it's certainly things that you can kind of link back and forth, um, almost like hyperlinks, I suppose you
Yes.
could call it.
Well, I'm really glad we got to address Boromir's speech, because that really is a really important part of this film. And you're right, Saruman's speech is just as important, in the sense that it is the opposite. It's not for good. This is purely for bad.
Yeah,
And it's kind of crazy, because you think like Saruman was made to be a force for good,
yeah,
and his voice is his
guide him in the
power.
right direction. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I think that's in the lore actually. That is one of his powers is his voice.
Yes.
I could be totally wrong there, but I think
No,
that's
no, I think
definitely
it
one
is,
of the.
because I remember in Lord of the Rings: A Battle for Middle Earth 2, the video
Oh,
game, like that was one of his
right.
superpowers, was like voice chant.
Okay, okay. So I've got his speech here.
Okay,
So it says, unless that's it's actually different. I actually remember it differently. But I'm going to ad lib.
go
if I
for it.
get this
Go,
wrong.
go, go. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it says a new power is rising. No, wait, no, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. It's definitely not it. I found it. Got
I'm
it
pretty sure that's it. I'm pretty sure he starts with that, doesn't he?
there. He starts with that, yeah. So a new power is rising. Its victory is at hand. This night, the land will be stained with the blood of Rohan. March to Helm's Deep. Leave none alive. To war.
Yes.
And it's like how evil do you have to be to say leave none alive?
Yeah.
Because in the film his voice, obviously Christopher Lee, his voice is actually chilling, as I said before, with that particular those three words, leave none alive.
Yes.
It's like there's pure evil in his voice.
Oh,
there.
mate. Yeah, those
And the
syllables.
Urukai,
Yeah.
and the Urukai are elated with it.
Yes.
You know, they're cheering,
Yes.
and it's like could this really be good? Like, could you look at that from the inside, still thinking it's good? Like, no, we're gonna go to this place where civilians are kept, women and children,
Yes.
and kill every single one of them. It's like how evil could you possibly get? And the worst part is you're not even doing it yourself. You're getting other people to do it for you.
Yeah. It is crazy. It's one of those, how should I put it, speeches that reminds me very much of Hitler, in the sense that like his ability to speak has persuaded the masses to go forth and massacre.
And believe they're doing the right thing all the while.
Yes. Except like you said, those words "leave none alive" are super changed in the film. Like they're so accentuated. Like they're so it's so strange compared to the rest of the speech, because he's like, when he says "to war," it's very like bassy, very different. But the "leave none alive" bit, it's like you've put it in italics, sort of thing. It's like it stands out.
Yeah, it's almost like the madness has fully taken over with those three syllables. It's like it's not even him saying the words. It's like it's something really really evil inside it. It's saying
that. Yeah. It's a crazy speech. I love it, mate. I'm so glad you brought that one up, because it leads nicely on to what you just had there. Is like the whole, what I would class as, if Saruman had spoken that in black speech, I wouldn't have been surprised. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, definitely.
If he'd said that in a sort of orcish manner, but
it would have had equal power, wouldn't it?
Exactly. And then after the rain starts, you have the Uruk chant, and it has that same sort of dark prowess that Saruman started. Yeah.
They're banging their pipes on the ground.
And it gives that war. You know, you've been referencing 300. It's like the size of the army and the sound. It's like when they shoot arrows into the sun and they say it blocked out the sun. There was so many of them. Yeah. It's a very simple. Like the sound of the Urukai is just so deafening. It's like, oh my god, it's just how are you meant to sort of battle?
And it's like, obviously it's like meant to sort of instill panic and fear into the hearts of men. And it obviously works, because that old guy is obviously shaking and he lets go of his arrow.
Yes.
And it's
exactly. It's just
they did they did what they were there. You know, they really did put fear in the hearts of men. And,
Yeah. And then you've got the "So It Begins," which is one of my favourite lines ever. Just like "So It Begins." Love it.
it's such good music, isn't it?
Oh mate, it's the
we haven't
greatest
even
battle of good of evil ever. It's just so good. I love it.
we haven't even touched on the music actually.
No, we should. Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that we haven't addressed is the power it has behind how you feel when you're sort of watching the film, and the battle begins, and that as soon as those large horns just sort of blow, do you feel the same way in the sense that it just gives that sort of adrenaline rush to go?
Yeah, it's like now, like it's actually starting. Like it's here now. You're about to be hit in the face with the shovel.
Mate,
Yeah.
couple of ladders to get over that wall.
Yeah, I mean that's it. Because you imagine how absolutely terrifying it would be to be, even if it was just a group of men armed with pieces of metal that are sharpened, and they're going to hack you to pieces. But that's what they're going to try and do. Imagine how terrifying it would actually be to stand in front of them. I mean, it would be, it would be, I don't know, well, it'd be unbearable for most people. I should imagine.
And that's why it's so amazing that Gimli and Legolas make a game out of it.
Yeah, that's it. Well, they're experienced, aren't they? So that's like, oh, there it is. Just another battle.
Well, it does always remind me of the stories I read, like about like how men sort of just cower in fear or run away or drink huge amounts of alcohol before battle begins.
Yeah.
And how it would.
I remember obviously I'm not sure they have it in the books. I think they may have actually, but they have the berserkers.
Yes. Yeah, the films. Yeah.
And so the word berserk comes from the words bear surge, and it comes from something that the Vikings used to do, where they would feed reindeer psychedelic mushrooms that would be otherwise poisonous to men.
Jeez.
The reindeer would filter the toxins out through their bodies. The men would then collect the urine of the reindeer, and they would then drink it, and then they would have a very, very powerful psychedelic experience, right? And they used to do this before going into battle. So what they would do is they would down, however much reindeer piss, and then they would convince themselves that they were bears.
Shit!
So
oh my god!
There would be no fear. So imagine if you had a horde of marauding Vikings coming at your village.
Yeah.
And they're not even they're to the point where they're not even human anymore because there's no reasoning with them at all. Like it would be terrifying, wouldn't it?
Right, a double-edged axe, and they're just swinging it around.
Exactly, and like a bit of armor and stuff like that. Some of them might even be naked, and it's like you can't do anything. You can't hurt them because the kind of mushroom they used to take, I think, was Amanita muscaria, and that dulls pain, and it also enhances physical performance. And so it's like you've got all these Vikings who are physically big, strong anyway. They're somehow even stronger physically because of this compound, and they think they're invulnerable.
That makes sense why the berserker takes 3 arrows before it goes down.
Exactly, yeah. But I remember that there were reports when the Spanish, maybe the British, when we first went to South America, and we were warring with the locals, there were reports of similar things with the tribesmen. And so you imagine, at the time when the Western world got to South America, we had muskets. So we had, firing little balls of lead. Imagine how much that would hurt to get hit by one. Well, apparently there were reports of these tribesmen being hit with multiple musket balls and not even slowing down.
Jeez.
Because they were hopped up on whatever psychedelic they were hopped up on.
Whoa.
And they're just charging. They're just going straight for the enemy. yeah, we've got a topic here, but that's obviously what.
No, that doesn't matter, mate. I think that's a fantastic point to make, because it is a really important part of how war is sort of conjured and almost gotten over. So men would take these things to be able to get past that fear, and like you said, 10,000 warriors. Can you imagine the fear in your legs alone?
It would be terrifying, and also knowing that there's basically no hope.
Yeah.
So it's not only is it that you've actually got to try and fight back at least, it's probably going to be an incredibly painful ending.
This is why.
Still got to do it.
Yeah, this is why Theoden's little sentence where he says, "Is this all you can conjure, Saruman?" Like, it's the biggest. Like, are you asking for more, sir? Like, are you asking for a second serving? Like, is this how you, it's just like madness for someone to say that.
In Avengers: Age of Ultron, when the Avengers are fighting all the Ultron robots.
Yes.
Thor screams, "Is that the best you can do?"
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And then about 1 million robots appear, and Ultron says, "This is the best I can do. All of me versus all of you." And it's like, it's that moment. It's like, yeah, and then Steve Rogers said, "You had to ask."
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing proceeds to happen. Is the wall gets blown up immediately after he says that.
Yeah. And that's obviously the look on Theoden's face. That's when he realised that, like, it's pretty much over. There's no saving this anymore.
No, and you have like the loss of Michael Vananine. I'm saying that improperly.
Haldir.
Haldir, yeah, but he's called by Haldir is his name, but he's called by Aragorn Michael Vananine, isn't he?
I think Michael Vananine means friend or something.
Oh, really? Oh, there you go. On that one. But his death is like the first death that we see of someone, like a character of serious, like sort of importance. And it sort of brings the reality where Aragorn sprints to him and holds him in his arms before he dies. And it is like really sad. You do see this sort of like, is this the end for the elves sort of thing? Their leaders just died.
That's it. Like, whatever values they held when they might have passed on to the men, it's like that channel they might have used is gone now.
Yeah, and it's like, your leader's gone. All the knowledge that you were going to pass on, like you said, is gone, and we just see the Uruk-hai just raging havoc, and they're having to retreat to the inner wall. And they're having to carry Gimli away as he's struggling in their arms. Let me at him! Let me at him! So funny. And then you have Legolas come down the stairs on a shield as he swings around and then shoots like multiple arrows. And it's those two just make that battle for me personally. I love it.
Yeah, that was good. The skateboarding on the shield, that was like the practice run for what he did with the Oliphant.
Yes. Yeah, it was, wasn't it? It was like, I can do this now, and now it's time to prove it in the next film.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
This is amateur level. Let's go to pro level.
This is what real skateboarding's all about, guys.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
So where are we at the moment? So obviously, once the wall is breached and the elves it's basically overrun, they all fall back to the keep.
Yes.
And Aragorn and Gimli are sent through that door to protect the causeway, just so they can repair the gates.
Yes, and he says, "Toss me."
Yeah.
Oh, which always gets me. Oh dear. And it is the biggest risk ever, isn't it? Moment.
Oh yeah, definitely. Certainly, like two of them against the entire army, basically.
Yeah.
But you're looking at them go, and you're thinking like they should just stay there.
No, that's what I was thinking. And it's like they're absolutely kicking the Uruk-hai's ass, and then you realise, that's only the first few.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
But that sort of what Legolas does, where he sort of takes the rope. One thing I didn't realise until I rewatched it is he's doing that while he's being shot at.
Yeah, so he's putting himself at risk, isn't he?
Yeah, it's crazy. And so you've got this whole process of you start to realise, like, this is actual war, because like there's no way out of this.
Yeah.
And even as soon as the weird thing is, this is what I didn't get right, is that they fix the gate, and then as soon as Aragorn and Gimli get up, they say the castle has been breached, fall back. So it's like as soon as they fixed it, it got broke again. I was like, oh, that was just a waste of time, wasn't it?
Just yeah, I swear. I mean, that's probably a bit of artistic license just for the sake of the film.
Just an extra scene, just to add on to how long the battle was going to be.
Yeah, it's well, just to show how good Aragorn and Gimli are at fighting, I suppose.
Exactly. And then you've got the most metaphorical part of the film. But were you going to say something then? Sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just going to say, yeah, and then they obviously fall back into the King's Chamber.
Exactly, and this is like the serious like light rising from the darkness moment, isn't it? Where they're like, we draw swords together, and it's like I love that line. It's we'll let the horn blow, and we'll draw swords together. Now for wrath, now for ruin. Let the red horn go, and it's like, wow, I'm getting chills right now just thinking about it. Just like
yeah, it's like a king's speech in the last moments.
Oh,
isn't it? It's like a Leonidas saying, "Spartans, prepare for glory."
Yes.
Like it's like you're about to die, but like this is it. This is what you've been living for. I suppose.
This is true meaning. Prepare for the end. And it's like they do it it's so beautiful because like as soon as the horn goes, and they charge and they're like and you get this just beautiful shot of them riding into the center of the Uruk-hai. Like they gallop through all of this like absolute, black destruction of darkness that is the Uruk-hai army.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have anything to add, because obviously the next thing you see is Gandalf in the top. I was wondering what you were going to say about that.
I like that moment because it's like Gandalf appears, and so it's like it's the ideal as we sort of return after the long nights of the battle. So basically, what's happened is all of the. It's going to sound a bit callous. All of the dead wood of Rohan has kind of been burned off.
Yes.
They're all dead, basically. They've all been killed by the Uruk-hai. Whatever was, I don't want to say weak, but whatever couldn't make it is gone.
Yeah.
And then the highest ideal appears and says, Theoden King stands alone. And then you have sort of the son, the son who would be king, comes and says, not alone, and then we're hearing, and obviously it's cleverly done.
Yes.
Because they're obviously charging down a really really steep hill, and it kind of gives you a hint about how, about just how masterfully the riders of Rohan can ride horses.
Yeah.
But obviously the timing is brilliant because it means the sun is right behind them and it blinds all the Uruk-hai, so they can't see anything, and so they just get hacked to pieces.
I think that's also a bit of Gandalf's magic there. He uses a little bit of a little bit of, because they've got the spears ready at the bottom, and then you see Gandalf and he's shining white, and he uses a little bit of his pack because like that's a known power of his is the ability to use weather. But, I always like that symbology because it's like Gandalf brings the light to the darkness. It's just like
definitely
to the king, and then you have the soundtrack in the background, like it's the best.
And everyone is like happy.
It is,
killing all these Uruk-hai, and they're like laughing about it, and it's and obviously it's good. It's like because it's like the dead wood of Rohan has kind of been burned off.
Yes.
Again, not to be too callous about it, but then you have a load of sort of loyal soldiers who are the kind of soldiers you would want anyway, and so they return, and then it's like the land is kind of fertile again, so to speak, and there's life now.
Yeah. Well, that's what you want, don't you? Because for the third film, you're challenged again. You're in against the true enemy, which is Sauron. So it's like Saruman's the preparer for Rohan, like almost like he's getting the Rohan state to get together to become stronger.
Yeah, and unify themselves.
Yeah. And so we
retreat into the forest.
Into the forest.
Consumed by nature.
which is brilliant. I love that. It's
Yeah,
one of
it's
those
good.
funny scenes that you see. You're like, that's why it wasn't in the feature film.
Yeah, yeah,
um, but this is leads on. So obviously that's my favorite part of this film. It's also the the shining part of the film is the battle for Helm's Deep. But this next bit is probably the most meaningful part of the film in my eyes because it's the scene in Osgiliath. And you know what I'm probably leading up to is
yeah, definitely. 'Cause I'd forgotten about that one. Yeah,
yes, it's
good
Sam's
scene, that.
speech. Sam's speech.
Yeah,
It's to me, it gets me every time I watch it. Get a little bit teary eyed just because it's really meaningful. It actually those words are meaningful in today's society, let alone in the film.
definitely, definitely. I think it kind of shows you that where Sam may have got his kind of values from. It might have been those old stories
Yes,
where maybe he was sort of brought up on stories of heroes, and so maybe he's got like an idea of some sort that we're not really aware of, and so maybe that's why he didn't have to go through the same sort of hero's journey that Frodo and Aragorn and Gandalf and Pippin and you know, basically everyone had to go through apart from him,
yes,
because he already kind of was the man that he should have been. Um, and I had no thought. I've literally just kind of put that together actually, but it's a good little speech because obviously Frodo was about to succumb to the ring
to,
and be
to
taken away by
darkness. Yeah,
the serpent, yeah, by the dragon. Um, and yeah, and obviously then that would have been the end of the story. But Sam manages to drag him away, and in the imagine going back to like the seven deadly sins where you can sort of be possessed by whatever. Obviously, Frodo nearly kills Sam in,
he does. Yeah, he nearly
yeah,
kills his
because he's
ideal.
sort of because he's sort of in a dream.
Yeah,
When he's about to give the ring away, and he's sort of woken up quite abruptly, and obviously he's in sort of like a panic state, and so he draws his sword, and it's like, well, maybe yeah, stop that, that's kind of, I suppose that's really when we understand the power that the ring is kind of exerting over Frodo and what he is having to resist.
yeah,
Um, and then yeah, it's a good little speech because it kind of wraps up the film because it's like throughout the whole film basically, Theoden and Aragorn they all knew there was no hope for Helm's Deep, but they kept fighting anyway.
yes.
And Sam just beautifully articulates it. I don't think that speech is in the books.
I don't think it is either, but I think that
Still a good
that
speech.
speech is better than anything that could sort of like have been in the book in some way or another because it shows that there is good in this world and it's worth fighting for no matter what. And you know what's funny is that after that speech, we see Faramir release Frodo and Sam, and it's like we see the true nature of Faramir. It's like that speech is heard by Faramir, and it's like, oh my goodness, I've made a mistake. Oh no, what have I done? I've been
Yeah,
hiding these people.
yeah. It's like I suppose he kind of realizes he's not been the hero of the story that he that he may have been brought up on. Because actually, in Return of the King, he speaks to Pippin in the extended scene. He speaks to Pippin and says that I was more interested in chasing dragons and stuff rather than returning to my studies. So maybe he was sort of raised on stories as well, like Sam was. So
Yeah,
he
and
can kind
that would make sense to why it got to him.
of. So there is actually maybe it's just really. Oh yeah, the book version. There is actually a book version of the speech. I don't know. It's quite long. Should I
It's
read it?
it's probably a lot longer than the one that we have in the movie. That's
Yeah,
only
it is a bit.
you know,
I'll
it's
send it to you. Maybe you can. Maybe
yeah,
you can
yeah,
make it.
definitely. I think that the fact that it gets to Faramir and the fact that it sums up the story and that it's basically saying that they're going to keep trudging on, they're going to continue to go to Mount Doom, even though they've gone through all this darkness. It's saying that Frodo may be taking the sort of heavy burden that is the ring, but he can still keep on going, and he requires both his ideals to understand his path to get there. One thing, and this is what I was talking about earlier, is this little interaction between Faramir and Gollum that we don't see in the feature film, is that he says, why are you taking them up this path? Why are you taking them through Shelob's lair, basically? And I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was a scene that they should have kept in. I thought, it shows to Frodo that he can't be trusted still.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm hesitant to get into it just because I think we've been here for however long, 3.5 hours.
Yes, we're talking.
I'm thinking we've missed a few things in the film, so it might be worth making note of them and then discussing them in the next when we talk about Return of the King.
Yes, we can come back to them and we can do a nice little highlight. Before we start the Return of the King, we can go over back at some of the stuff that we talked about for the Two Towers, because we've basically gone over the majority of stuff in the film, and we've gone over a lot of the stuff that I've got highlighted down at the moment for the Two Towers. But if you can think of any ideas, mate, off the top of your head before I end the podcast, and we can do a little sort of summary on how we felt genuinely about this.
Oh man, I mean, to say that these are the greatest stories ever told is, I don't know, I'm not even sure that really does them justice. I think the next podcast will have to be a two-parter.
I totally agree, mate. There's going to be so much. This has been a 3 hour and 10-minute or so podcast, so it's got lots of juicy bits in there, but we've still got so much more to talk about. And the Return of the King is just, it's nearly 4 hours.
There's so much in it. So,
yeah.
But I think I don't know really. To sum it up, the effect these stories have. I'll tell you a story actually. A couple of weeks ago, after we recorded the first podcast we did,
yes,
I found a video. Just stumbled across it because obviously it's kind of, I guess, the YouTube algorithm was suggesting stuff that is similar to what I've already listened to, and it's a video, but it's just a song, and it's the last song that's in not song. Sorry, it's the last track that's in the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yes.
And I'll see if I can find it quickly.
Is it Aya? As in E-Y-E?
No, it's not. No. It's not that one. It's mostly just instrumental. It's the Breaking in the Fellowship.
Yes.
I'll send it to you. Beautiful song. And it's like 7 minutes long, right?
Yeah.
7 minutes 20 long. I'll send you the link.
Yes.
So maybe put it in the description. So maybe.
I will chuck it in the description. 100%. Yeah.
But there's a comment on the video, and it describes the last scene. And I was listening to the song with my headphones in, and I read the description of the last scene, and it's Frodo stands on the edge of the shore, blah blah blah, and he hears Gandalf, and so on and so forth, and it all happens, and I genuinely cried a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's so, but it wasn't sadness. It was like, I'm not even sure I really know what the emotion was. The only thing I can think it was is like awe. It's like a numinous experience in some sense. It's like the stories are so powerful that just the music alone can remind me of so much that it can bring forward such a strong emotion. Yeah, I don't know.
I totally agree, and I want you to send me that link because I want to listen and read that comment, because I think it reminds me very much of how I feel about Sam's speech in the Two Towers. It brings me hope, it brings me joy, and it makes me feel positive about the way that humanity can potentially unite itself in some way or another. But, on that note, mate, I think we should end it there. And
I will say I'm absolutely exhausted.
I'm knacking you out. Thank you so much again, mate.
No worries, mate. I
really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed that. That was a good time. I really enjoyed that.
I'm just going to say now, the next one, even juicier, more details, more everything. We're going to bake it into a two-parter. We're going to exhaust Ollie even more, and it's going to be just as much fun for this one. We're going to learn just as much as we did in this podcast, because I know learned a lot more from Ollie here in some of the details that he's telling me from the books than I did probably from me. But anyway, this has been a Taylor's Tales podcast. This has been Chris's Corner. I'm your host, Chris Taylor, and that's been Ollie Deacon. Thanks, Ollie.
Cheers, mate. See ya.